Chapter 562. Faced with Grimm's warm invitation, Wizard Forgan's expression was both awkward and solemn. After a moment's hesitation, Forgan finally spoke. "Wizard Grimm, since you haven't signed a new service contract with our family after advancing to level 2, I'm here today to inform you that you and your subordinates no longer belong to the Salubo family." Wizard Forgan had obviously used some kind of spell on his last sentence. Not only did the people present hear it clearly, even the adventurers and mercenaries that had escaped into the nearby forest, as well as the wizards and apprentices in the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda, could hear it clearly. In that moment, many wizards and apprentices in the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda gasped. Everyone's emotions became restless. A large group of vampires had come looking for trouble, and the main family, the Salubo family, had kicked Grimm out. This time, the Flame Monarch was in trouble. As members of the blazing Flame Monarch, would they be able to escape this calamity? No one was willing to put up with a problem that involved their own lives. Thus, in Grimm's senses, the Flame Monarch was like a raging volcano. All sorts of angry and pessimistic emotions were suddenly released, sweeping toward the master of the Wizard's Pagoda. Of course, the ones who reacted the most strongly were the resident wizards. They were not core wizards of the Flame Monarch, and had only chosen to become resident wizards because they coveted the benefits, or because they wanted a place to stay. Now that the Wizard's Pagoda was facing a crisis of life and death, they were naturally the most unstable. To be honest, they would never agree to fight to the death against the vampires of the Wick family for the sake of the Flame Monarch. Thus, with the control crystal of the Wizard's Pagoda, Grimm received countless resignation applications from the internal department. Among them were wizards, apprentices, pharmacists, herbalists, beast tamers, skinner, and cobblers employed by the Wizard's Pagoda. Some of the more impatient ones did not even wait for Grimm's reply before packing their bags and running away. A moment later, a large group of people rushed out of the flame cave, bowing to Grimm, Gargamel, and the vampires in front of them. They shouted, "I'm not a member of the Wizard's Pagoda," and then scattered. Among the crowd, Gargamel naturally saw many familiar faces. These resident sorcerers would usually flatter the Gargamel Deputy Tower Master to fight for resources and benefits for themselves. However, now that the blazing Flame Monarch was in danger, they were the fastest to run. Gargamel's attention was on the group of sorcerers, while Grimm's attention was on a strange figure mixed in the crowd. After he left the flame cave, he did not scatter into the surrounding forest like the others. Instead, he flew up and quietly stood behind Wizard Forgan. Although the other party was wearing a black robe with a hood hanging low, Grimm could still recognize him through the familiar soul undulations. The blazing Flame Monarch's Tower Magus. He was one of Grimm's oldest apprentices. The other party's current attitude had clearly revealed his true identity. It seemed like the Salubo family had been keeping an eye on Grimm ever since he returned from the Night Plane. This one was also very patient, being able to hide beside Grimm for so long. From this, it could be seen that the Salubo family knew everything that had happened in the blazing Flame Monarch. It was all thanks to Magus AM. In that moment, Grimm and Gargamel were like rocks in a small stream. Countless magi, acolytes, and craftsmen rushed out of the flame cave, fleeing into the surrounding forest. This caused the two figures that stood proudly to seem lonely and desolate. Hennis, who was leisurely sitting on a black high-back chair, gently swirled the glass in his hand. His slender, cold, and pale face was filled with an unconcealable sneer of disdain. This was the atmosphere he had deliberately created. Before he killed his target, he wanted to let them taste the feeling of betrayal and the pain of defeat. This was the only way to make up for the humiliation they had suffered from destroying a vampire manor in the Vick family's territory. Lester, who was one of the parties involved, also laughed coldly. Ever since the incident in the Rose Manor half a month ago, he felt a mountain of pressure whenever he thought of that female vampire's talent, making it hard for him to eat or sleep. If he was allowed to continue growing like this, the backlash of his bloodline would become a foreseeable fact. Thus, even if it meant risking his own reputation, He had to use the power of his family to completely eradicate this hidden danger. Thus, when the crowds of people fled the Flame Monarch's wizard tower, Lester was undoubtedly the most worried of all the attacking vampires. His bloodshot eyes widened as he scanned the crowd fleeing the flame cave, afraid that the female vampire would take the opportunity to sneak out. Wizard Forgan, who was standing silently on the horizon, was undoubtedly the most embarrassed of all. Although he didn't object to the decision made by Lord Sanazar himself, he felt that it was too rash and heartless. It was true that Hennis, who had brought a large number of subordinates to Ferdinand City to denounce them, was not easy to deal with, but that didn't mean that he would abandon a rank 2 magus. Although the conflict between the higher-ups of the Cerubo family and Grimm had been going on for a long time, no one in the outside world knew about it. No matter how dignified Wizard Forgan's explanation was, in the eyes of outsiders, the Cerubo family was cold-blooded and heartless for abandoning a high-grade magus that belonged to them. This would be a huge blow to the reputation of the Cerubo family. Forgan also felt that this Grimm in front of him wasn't the kind of brainless idiot who would walk to his own death. Since he dared to provoke a vampire family with a rank 3 magus, he had to have some sort of way to deal with it. To be honest, even if the Cerubo family removed his backup and cut all ties with him, it would still be wishful thinking for the vampires to destroy Grimm with just the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda beneath his feet. A powerful magus with the support of the Wizard's Pagoda would definitely be able to unleash power beyond everyone's imagination. Grimm might not be able to defeat the rank 3 hinds, but if he hid inside the Wizard's Pagoda, it would be extremely difficult for the vampires to break in. Hence, the most likely outcome was that both sides would fight to the death, and then be forced into a stalemate for a long period of time. The vampires sealed off the perimeter of the Flame Monarch, cutting off all avenues of reinforcements for Grimm. Grimm and a few other magi were trapped in a lone tower. Although it would be difficult for the enemy to break in, they would also be in a predicament of a lack of resources and food. When that time came, Grimm and the rest would find it hard to continue. Other than lowering their heads to Lord Sanazar and accepting harsher terms, they would have no one else to turn to for help. At that time, the Cerubo family could intervene in the battle as a mediator. Although they might have to pay more resources, they would have a chance to take in another rank 2 magus and his subordinates. If a rank 2 magus who had been beaten into submission could do this, even Lord Sanazar would wake up laughing in his sleep. "You are Grimm, the fire wizard?" Heinz finally asked as he slowly sipped on the blood wine in his hand. His sharp aura penetrated reality, mind, soul, and many other levels, sweeping toward Grimm like a raging wave. Grimm took a step forward and used his broad body to block Gargamel. The layer of hazy fluorescent light around his body suddenly shone brightly and collided with the mental pressure that was coming at him. Although mental pressure was invisible, under the drive of heinous powerful mental power, it was as if it had a physical form, almost manifesting in the real world. Grimm resisted the pressure with the help of the Wizard's Pagoda's flame barrier, but the ground around him could not withstand the pressure of a rank 3 vampire wizard, and the ground sank by more than half an inch. From an outsider's point of view, it was as if Grimm had suddenly become half an inch shorter. Grimm felt a chill in his heart. The vampires were not creatures that were known for their mental strength. If he could have such a terrifying mental pressure, then how strong would the mental strength of those elemental sorcerers or spirit sorcerers be? Grimm, who had been having a smooth sailing recently, could not help but feel a little apprehensive. The division of ranks in the Magus world was indeed true. The difference of a single rank would often result in a difference of more than 10 times. There was still a terrifying gap between his strength and a rank 3 wizard's. I would like to express my deepest apologies for what happened in the Rose Manor half a month ago. If you allow me, I hope to compensate your family's losses with a reasonable price. Even in front of a rank 3 wizard, Grimm still expressed his opinion in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Compensation? Kakik. As if they had heard the funniest joke in the world, the rank 3 wizard hinds, followed by the rest of the vampires, could not help but laugh maniacally. Then use your lives to make up for it. As the rank 3 wizard hinds hissed, All of the vampires rose into the air and charged at Grim and Gargamel like a red cloud. Among them, the two Rank 2 vampires, Lester and Tori, flew in front of the rest of the Rank 1 vampires, their clothes fluttering in the wind. "Go back and take care of the Wizard's Pagoda. I'll handle this." Grim was indeed worthy of being the leader of the camp. In this critical moment, he was still able to remain calm and collected. He pushed the Gargamel into a flaming gate, and with a wave of his hand, an oddly shaped long staff appeared in his hand. Magic Flame Wall, Resistance Aura. With a soft shout, 2 defensive flame spells exploded in front of Grim, engulfing all of the attacking vampires. Chapter 563. This is my territory, I call the shots. Elemental wizards specialized in violent elemental attacks, while vampires were like ghosts roaming the battlefield. 2 level 2 vampires fighting a level 2 fire wizard together seemed to have an overwhelming advantage on the surface, but reality was the exact opposite. However, the reality was the exact opposite. Grim, who was isolated, blasted the 2 tier 2 vampires away with his fire spell, not daring to stay in one place for too long. The main reason for this was the protection of the Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda. The Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard's Pagoda was Grim's personal wizard tower, so Grim had unparalleled control over it. Furthermore, the flame barrier created by the Blazing Flame Monarch could reach anywhere within 10 miles of the Wizard's Pagoda. This meant that Grim did not have to worry about personal defense during battle. If the 2 level 2 vampires could not break through the flame barrier around his body, they could only take a beating without being able to retaliate. Even if they braved Grim's ferocious cannons to launch an attack, they would be completely nullified by the flame barrier created by the projectiles. In order to harm Grim, the 2 vampires had to increase the power of their attacks to the limit of the flame barrier in an instant. Otherwise, if their attacks could not beat the self-recovery of the flame barrier, they would not be able to harm Grim, even if they attacked for 100,000 years. Unless the Wizard's Pagoda's elemental energy was depleted. The reason why the wizards of the sorcerer world loved building Wizard's Pagodas was because of their powerful support in battle. Without an attack that was 10 times stronger than the Wizard's Pagoda's defense, it would be impossible to break through it. Back in the day, how could the first-generation wizards, who had yet to fully develop their powers, survive the terrifying wave of magic beasts? They relied on the indestructible Wizard Pagoda and the wizards stationed in the Wizard's Pagoda. But today, with the support of the Wizard's Pagoda, Grim was able to take on the attacks of 2 vampires of the same level. This also showed how powerful the Wizard's Pagoda was. A battle between level 2 wizards was terrifying, and the level 1 vampire Viscounts had no chance of interfering. The remaining 11 vampire Viscounts let out a roar and turned around, charging toward the flame cave like lightning. Since the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda had been trapped here by the 2 earls, the defenses of the Wizard's Pagoda would definitely be weakened. If they were to attack the Wizard's Pagoda, even if they would not be able to achieve anything, they would at least be able to make the Fire Wizard unable to fend off attacks from both sides. However, the moment the 11 Crimson Shadows entered the Flame Cave, they were struck out by a violent and ferocious wave of lightning before they could even get a clear look at the situation inside. 9 blood shadows shot out and turned into red bats that circled above the fiery cavern while letting out ghostly cries. The 2 blood shadows that fell behind were surrounded by dazzling blue lightning. Before they could escape from the electric net, they were turned into ashes amidst a series of mournful wails. Soon after, a tall and mighty creature that looked like a centaur rushed out of the cave, waving a lightning spear that blocked the entrance of the cave. Bowl-sized azure dragon scales, vigorous and thick dragon claws, incomparably tyrannical dragon strength, coupled with the surging power of thunder and lightning. Heinous, who was leisurely watching the battle from the back, raised his eyebrows. The blood wine in his glass suddenly shook a little. Not a centaur, but a draconian, and a pure-blooded draconian with a level 2 lightning element. Where did this Grim find such a high-quality foreign race? Wizard Forgan, who was standing in mid-air, also froze. He could not help but turn around and look at Wizard AM. "Sir, I've never seen this draconian in the Wizard's Pagoda before. It, it, it might have just appeared in the past few days." AM could feel the anger in Wizard Forgan's eyes. A mysterious level 2 powerhouse. How could he not find out anything about such an important piece of information? This would be an intolerable mistake, no matter which spy it was. If Lord Senazar knew that Grimm could find such a powerful foreign race ally, he would definitely reconsider his decision to abandon Grimm. Just as everyone was thinking about this, the 9 level 1 vampires suddenly let out a ghostly howl and rushed into the nearby forest. After a while, they returned with 1 or 2 unconscious human mercenaries in their hands. They quickly gathered together and formed a circle. Then, they tore the human mercenaries in their hands in half. When a large amount of blood splattered out, they chanted a strange witchcraft incantation in unison. A blood-red halo flashed in the sky, and the 2 vampires that had turned into ashes mysteriously emerged from the blood mist. Other than their pale faces and weak aura, they were no different from before. This was probably one of the vampire family's secret resurrection spells. Seeing this, the wizards on the scene could not help but shake their heads and sigh. No wonder these vampire families could survive for thousands of years. Just this resurrection spell alone was not something a normal wizard family could do. With this kind of resurrection spell, it was no wonder these vampires were so fierce in battle. The vampires had sent out 11 vampire viscounts, level 1, and 2 vampire counts, level 2. The other side had also revealed 2 level 2 powerhouses. In terms of strength alone, the vampires no longer had any advantage on the battlefield. If they had the support of the Wizard's Pagoda, the ones who would be at a disadvantage in a real battle would be the Vic family that had come from afar. The appearance of a level 2 draconian was undoubtedly the most important bargaining chip on the battlefield. Its appearance directly changed the strength of both sides, as well as the crowd's estimation of the outcome of the battle. The Vic family, who had brought out most of their strength, was an ancient vampire family that had existed for thousands of years. If they still could not suppress a fire wizard that had advanced less than half a year ago, the reputation that the Vic family had built up over thousands of years would be instantly destroyed. When that happened, all the wizard families in the scattered forest of towers would see them as weaklings. Anyone would not be able to resist the urge to take a bite out of them. Seeing that the situation was not in their favor, Marquis Hennis, who had been sitting quietly in the back, could no longer sit still. There was no declaration of battle, nor was there any sound of warning. Hennis appeared beside Grimm in a flash along with a streak of bloody light. He waved his claws repeatedly, and the few light claws caused the flame barrier to tremble unceasingly. The A.I. Chip's warnings rang out in Grimm's mind. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 13%. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 11%. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased by 15%. Multiple warnings rang out one after another, and the defensive strength of the flame barrier projected by the blazing flame monarch's Wizard's Pagoda fell sharply. Even though the Wizard's Pagoda was continuously injecting fire energy into the barrier, it could not match the speed and power of the enemy's attacks. Beep. Flame barrier has received external attack. Defense has decreased to 30%, about to shatter. At this moment, Grimm's face turned deathly pale. The A.I. Chip estimated that the Flame Monarch's flame barrier had a defensive strength of at least 1,000 degrees. Coupled with the continuous replenishment of fire energy, it was more than enough to withstand the attacks of double the number of Grade 1 elemental magi. But even such a powerful flame barrier was like an eggshell in the hands of a Grade 3 magus that could be easily crushed with the flick of a finger. Furthermore, this magus was a vampire magus that was publicly acknowledged to be the weakest in terms of attack power. Even though Grimm had imagined the strength of a Grade 3 magus countless times, the information in his mind could not compare to the might of a Grade 3 magus in reality. Grimm was flustered but he did not panic. He quickly retreated, waving his destructive flames to summon a large meteor shower that covered the surroundings. He knew his limits. Trying to lock onto Henna's position with a single target spell was a joke. Only a large area of effect flame spell could affect him. Grim did not expect these spells to harm Hennis. He only hoped to restrict or delay his opponent's attacks, giving him space to dodge. Grim retreated a few steps, but before he could regroup with Draconid Zacha, the flame barrier around him disappeared with a crisp crack. Hennis Netherblood Ghost Claw had powerful corrosive properties and terrifying blood poison. The flame barrier of over 1,000 degrees did not even last 5 seconds before it shattered into pieces. Without the flame barrier, Grim's lava shield of 500 degrees and flame barrier of 200 degrees could not even withstand a single blow. Fortunately, they had bought Grim half a second of time. Thus, Grim managed to leap out of the flame barrier with difficulty before Hennis' blood-red claws tore through his throat. This was the most dangerous flame leap he had ever used since advancing to become a magus. As he staggered out from beside Draconid Zacha, he felt a sharp pain in his throat. He had difficulty swallowing, as if he had been struck by the enemy's bloody claws the moment he leapt out. "Quick! Retreat to the Wizard's Pagoda!" Grim yelled in a muffled voice. With the help and protection of Draconid Zacha, they escaped into the flame cave. Perhaps fearing the terrifying speed of the level 3 Hennis, Draconid Zacha even used the most violent lightning storm to cover the entrance of the cave to prevent the enemy from pursuing them. The two supported each other as they ran along the twisting lava tunnel of the flame cave toward the Wizard's Pagoda 200 meters underground. Marquis Hennis appeared at the edge of the lightning storm like an eerie ghost. He leaned forward slightly, the tip of his tall nose less than 10 centimeters from the edge of the storm. His eerie silver pupils pierced through the raging storm and locked onto the two fleeing figures. 2 level 2 magi. In his eyes, tier 2 sorcerers, who were feared by the people of the world, were just prey for him to play around with. They could not be considered his opponent, if not for the fact that he was afraid of being destroyed by the full power of a level 2 Draconid. He might have caught up to them before they could even run 10 meters. But that was not a big deal. The other party had only extended his life by a dozen or so, and the ending was already set in stone. Sensing the energy level of the lightning storm rapidly decreasing, Hennis's silver pupils became brighter and brighter. When the last bolt of lightning disappeared, Hennis turned into a bloody shadow and disappeared into the pitch-black entrance of the flame cave. Chapter 564. As the screams of the vampires disappeared into the depths of the cave, the outside of the cave returned to its usual silence. Wizard Forgan hesitated for a moment in midair, but he eventually landed with AMU. The appearance of a level 2 Draconian had made him a little uneasy. He couldn't help but frown as he looked at the dark entrance of the cave. "My lord, although Grim has the help of a Draconian, he is still a level 2. They have no chance of winning against a level 3 Lord Heinous. What are you still worried about?" Wizard AMU mustered up his courage and tried to comfort Forgan in a low voice. What do you know?" Wizard Forgan frowned. If Grim really has no chance of winning, why would he come out? If he hid in the Wizard's Pagoda, he would not suffer any losses no matter how much the enemy yelled. But he chose to come out and fight us head-on. "I can't help but feel like there's a conspiracy going on here." "You mean?" Wizard AMU's eyes were wide open, a look of disbelief on his face. He had lived in the Flame Monarch for decades. In the end, it was just a beginner's Wizard's Pagoda. If it wasn't for the Black Forest and the enviable resources of magical beasts and living creatures, it wouldn't have been so popular. As one of Grimm's disciples, AMU was very familiar with the Wizard's Pagoda. Other than a few forbidden areas that he could not get close to, he had already explored all the other facilities and found nothing out of the ordinary. Some time ago, there was a rumor in the Wizard's Pagoda that his teacher had organized an invasion of another world. Since he was not involved, he did not know the details. However, it was true that a few core wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda had gone missing. Meryl, Sabrina, Bliss, Inder, they had never appeared after disappearing from the wizard's pagoda. Grim and Mary, on the other hand, had reappeared after disappearing for 2 months. AMU did not notice anything out of the ordinary from their mannerisms. The only unusual thing was that half a month ago, there was a problem with the sealing room on the 3rd floor of the wizard's pagoda, and all wizards were temporarily suspended from using it. As the sealing room was very limited, most wizards would only use it a few times in their lives, so it did not attract the attention of the wizards in the wizard's pagoda. If AMU wasn't an observant person, perhaps even he wouldn't have noticed this little detail that had no impact on his life. Now, it seemed that the problem with the sealing room was fake, and that there were more things inside. Dragon people? Could it be that Grimm had intruded into a dragon kingdom? Right when Am couldn't help but let his imagination run wild, his body suddenly swayed, and he became slightly unstable. When he came back to his senses, he realized that it wasn't that he had lost his footing, but the ground had begun to shake violently. In front of him, the originally flat ground suddenly undulated like an earth dragon. It was as if a huge creature had suddenly drilled its way into the ground and was frantically struggling to dig. The earth was like a piece of rag. Countless wrinkles and cracks appeared on its surface before it shattered in an instant. Countless bottomless ravines and hills suddenly appeared, and then shattered into pieces, continuously disintegrating. 100-meter-tall pillar of dust shot out from the densely packed cracks, instantly devouring the camps and markets around the flame cavern. Vaguely, you seemed to hear a loud and terrifying dragon roar coming from underground. He must have heard it wrong. There were no dragons near the blazing flame monarch. However, just when AMU was feeling doubtful, Wizard Forgan, who was standing in front of him, suddenly widened his eyes as if he had seen a ghost. AMU might not be able to make a clear judgment, but as a rank 2 magus, there was no way he would make a mistake. The explosion underground was not because the blazing flame monarch had used some large-scale spell, but just as Wizard Forgan's heart was pounding, a loud noise suddenly came from the entrance of the flame cavern. Tons of lava boulders, as well as countless amounts of sand, stones, and soil, were thrown into the air by a tremendous force. Amidst this pillar of mud and dust that was hard to see, 2 creatures with huge differences in size soared upwards, flying while tangling with each other. Even the thick, dusky dust could not block the bloody scratches of the rank 3 Marquis Hennis Underworld Blood Ghost Claw. The extremely dense bloody energy was enough to show that Hennis was going all out. Even so, Hennis Netherblood Ghost Claw still couldn't break through the basin-sized layers of azure dragon scales on his opponent's body. As for the corrosive and blood-poison properties of the Underworld Blood Ghost Claw, they were directly dispersed by the blinding lightning on the surface of the Marquis body. Hennis flapped his wings and flew swiftly while dodging his opponent's terrifying bite, pounce, wing strike, tail whip, as well as the frightening short dragon breath. Following a clear and resonant dragon's roar, Hennis, who had been struck by the dragon's aura, paused for a moment before being engulfed by the horrifying wave of lightning. After half a finger, Hennis let out a mournful cry and dragged his charred body out of the lightning. Not daring to stay any longer, the blood energy in his body exploded, and his entire body turned into a strange bloody shadow, disappearing in an instant. At this moment, the terrifying opponent raised its neck and let out another resonant dragon roar in the direction Hennis had escaped. Only then did it flap its huge wings in satisfaction, occupying the sky and soaring to its heart's content. That malevolent dragon horn, those gleaming fangs, that bony and lean body, those thick and powerful dragon claws, those huge and broad dragon wings, and that 8-meter-long bony tail. The proud rank 3 lightning dragon arms proudly soared in the blue sky and white clouds, showing off its majestic body to this mysterious world. Only after flying thrice in the sky to its heart's content did lightning dragon arms notice the 2 human magi who were staring at it with their mouths wide open, staring at it with a stupefied look in their eyes. Why are there still 2 little bugs here that haven't been chased away? Seeing the two wizards opening their mouths to say something, Arms, who was filled with hatred toward wizards, didn't care about what they said. In the next second, a terrifying thunderstorm wrapped around the two magi and flung them tens of kilometers away. Humph, I can't kill you, but I can at least let you suffer a little. Thinking viciously, the rank 3 lightning dragon arms landed on the ground. The lightning dragon arms landed gracefully on the ground amid the sound of sand and pebbles flying in the air. After the short battle underground, the flame cavern had been completely destroyed by the battle between the two Type 3 powerhouses. The entire ground was in a state of desolation. Hot air kept rising from the ground, mixing with the sand and dirt. The air was so dirty that it was hard to breathe. The two magi had fought their way up, and the hole they created was covered up by the falling rocks and sand. If Arms wanted to go back underground, he would have to use his dragon claws to dig another way out. Otherwise, he would have to wait for the fire magi to pick him up. Arms squatted on top of the ruins and kept scanning the surroundings. That damn fire magi didn't just ask him to chase away the vampire leader. She also asked him to block the path of retreat of the other vampires, forcing him, a Tier 3 Thunder Dragon, to serve as a despicable thug was an insult to the great Thunder Dragon race. But for the sake of the precious Dragon Oath Gemstone, Arms decided to endure it. Lightning Dragon Arms grumbled angrily while using his power of the will to scan the ground for any abnormalities within a 10-kilometer radius. Abruptly, it straightened its body and stared unblinkingly at a pile of rubble 1,000 meters away from it with a pair of huge amber-like eyes. As if it had heard something, its huge and strong body instantly soared into the air and then swooped down with an unstoppable momentum. A muffled sound echoed. The pile of rubble turned into powder under the dragon's huge claws, and a vampire that had just dug out a tunnel was stomped into meat paste in an instant. I was a bit too heavy. Arms couldn't help but be startled. Only now did he remember that the fire magi wanted him alive. He raised his claws and licked the flesh on them. They were weak and seemed to be a rank 1 vampire. They weren't the target. Relieved, Arms strolled back to his original spot and continued to remain vigilant. With a rank 3 lightning dragon blocking the way, how could the vampires that had swarmed into the ground find a way to escape? The vampires attacking this time were all core members of the Vic family. They were all powerful and skilled in battle, so Grimm didn't send out the Magi under him. Instead, he cooperated with the Dragon Man Zacha to search for traces of the vampires in the underground lava passageways that were broken into countless segments. After all, this was the Blazing Flame Monarch's territory. Large amounts of fire eyes were released, and the vampires that were scurrying about in the tunnels were found one by one. Grade 2 against Grade 1, and there were 2 of them at the same time. As such, it was difficult for the vampires to escape once they were targeted. They were all beaten black and blue, then bound up with anti-magic chains and thrown back to the Blazing Flame Monarch. After a thorough search, Grimm's first target, the rank 2 vampire Lester, was finally found in a tunnel less than 10 meters from the surface. After a relaxing, bloody battle, Lester was pierced in the thigh by Zacha's lightning spear and electrocuted into an afro. Only then was he captured by Grimm and brought back to the Blazing Flame Monarch. With Lester here, Grimm couldn't be bothered to chase after another rank 2 vampire. He used a gate of fire to bring Arms back and cut off all contact with the surface. Chapter 565. Blazing Flame Monarch, Giant Dragon, Vampire. When these unrelated nouns were piled together, they became the most explosive terms, instantly attracting the attention of countless people. The leader of the vampire family in the southwest area of the Scattered Tower Forest, Level 3 Heinous, Vic led his people to attack, raising the flag of revenge, swearing to destroy the Blazing Flame Monarch Wizard Pagoda that Grimm had spent so much effort to build. Due to the incident at the Rose Manor and the silence of the higher-ups of the Cerubo family, the Scattered Tower Forest Wizard Association acquiesced to this attack. A Level 3 vampire was leading the team, and there were 2 Level 2 vampires and 2 official vampires in the team. This kind of power was enough to destroy a small family. Even against mid-sized families that did not have enough resources, this was a powerful team that could not be underestimated. However, it was this team that had been defeated by the private Wizard's Pagoda of an unknown Level 2 wizard. Level 2 Powerful Draconians. Level 3 Terrifying Thunder Dragons. These strange and unexpected creatures actually appeared one by one in a remote private wizard pagoda. The psychological impact of this was so huge that it was hard for people to accept it, especially those resident wizards who could not wait to announce that they were leaving the Blazing Flame Monarch before the battle. All of them were filled with regret. In the past, even though the name Fire Demon was famous, it was only briefly praised around the Cerubo family's territory. As Grim hid in the Blazing Flame Monarch and tried to break through to Level 2, the name Fire Demon was forgotten after decades of silence. However, with the outbreak of this family war and the escape of the Level 3 vampire, the name Fire Demon once again rose to fame, becoming a powerful figure that everyone knew. With the escape of a large number of former members of the Wizard's Pagoda, the process and result of the battle, as well as some hidden information, spread throughout the scattered Tower Forest area. Since the higher-ups of the Cerubo family had already announced that Grim was no longer a member of their family, with the victory of this battle, a new wizard family would be born in the center of the wizard continent. With the power of this battle, as long as this Grim stood out and shouted for help, there would definitely be many roaming wizards who would respond. After all, attaching oneself to the side of a newly risen magus meant that the resources and benefits one could obtain would be extremely bountiful. However, what made the sorcerer families even more surprised was how Grim, a mere Tier 2 sorcerer, managed to summon a Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. This simply subverted their previous understanding of the greedy and arrogant giant dragons. Of course, there was a rumor circulating in the Magus circle that Grim had probably found a small dragon plane, and his allies were his collaborators in the dragon plane. Compared to the other rumors, this piece of information was rather nonsensical, but surprisingly, it was acknowledged by all the Magi, because only this kind of reality could explain all the doubts. For a moment, the Blazing Flame Monarch, Fire Demon, Grim, Giant Dragon. These terms were all linked together, becoming the hottest topic in the scattered Spire Forest region. Ordinary dignitaries and wealthy merchants naturally used these as topics of conversation during their leisure time and would discuss them enthusiastically from time to time. However, for the Magi who possessed great power and profound knowledge, the entire incident revealed a lot of information that was worth pondering over. Giant dragons had been extinct in the Magus world for tens of thousands of years. Although the large Magus families and organizations had control of a portion of the Dragon Plains world waymarks, most of them chose to keep it a secret and would not easily make it public. Even if other Magi coveted the so-called dragon pet, they could only regret it. Now, they had actually heard of clues about giant dragons from a newly advanced Magus. Many Magi who lacked powerful magic pets or mounts could not help but feel excited. Hence, after the battle of the Blazing Flame Monarch, many powerful Magi could not help but cast their gazes towards the remote and desolate dark forest. However, since that battle had destroyed all paths to the Blazing Flame Monarch, they could only suppress their restless emotions and quietly wait for Grim to reappear. They refused to believe that Grim would not be tempted if they used magic crystals and resources to buy a dragon. As long as they could obtain a dragon pet that they were satisfied with, many Magi would not mind spending their savings over 100 years. Strength. In the Magus world, only strength was the foundation that determined everything. A powerful dragon pet was undoubtedly a part of a Magus' personal strength. Blazing Flame Monarch. Regardless of the commotion in the outside world, the Wizard's Pagoda was still bustling with activity. To be honest, those who could remain in the Wizard's Pagoda and face the challenge together with Grim when the vampire family attacked will become the core strength of Grim's faction in the future. After the battle, Gargamel calculated that there were only 54 people left in the Wizard's Pagoda after the battle. There were 5 magi, 29 apprentices, and 20 servants of the wizard's pagoda. However, what moved Grimm the most was not the magi and apprentices, but the Medusa he had subdued in the dark forest. Hearing that the wizard's pagoda was about to be attacked by another powerful Magus faction, Medusa had brought her snake demon subordinates to the blazing flame monarch without hesitation to help. She had no idea about the existence of the Draconians and Lightning Dragons. As for the other 2 subsidiary factions of the blazing flame monarch, the Manticore family and the Demon Dog tribe, they were more ambiguous and procrastinating. However, it was fortunate that the Manticore leader had been loyal during the battle in the Flame Cave, severely delaying the assault of the vampires. As such, Grimm had listed it as one of the heroes of the tower's defense. As for the other Demon Dog tribe, the 3-headed devil hound Angugia, it was clearly ambivalent. Even though it had received orders before the battle, it had been dragging its feet, only arriving near the blazing flame monarch halfway through the battle. Only when it saw the tide turn and victory was in the wizard's pagoda's favor did it rush out like a gust of wind to help the blazing flame monarch clean up the mess. Of course, Grimm was aware of all of this. Even though he did not say anything on the surface, he had already sentenced the 3-headed devil hound Angugia to death in his heart. If there was a chance in the future, the job of sending people to their deaths to scout the way would definitely fall on its head. Even though the wizard's pagoda had become much quieter after the victory, it was still filled with jubilation. Gargamel waved his hand and opened up the storeroom, bringing out countless delicacies and wine to reward the future backbone of the family that had stood firm on his side. As for Grimm, Gargamel was dead set on him. Gargamel had thought that everyone in the blazing flame monarch would not be able to escape this crisis of destruction, and had already mentally prepared himself for death. But who knew that the mysterious Master Grimm had unknowingly convinced the Draconians and Lightning Dragons, allowing them to become the wizard's pagoda's hidden soldiers and powerful reinforcements at the most critical moment. No matter how powerful a level 3 vampire was, it was impossible for him to defeat a level 3 lightning dragon. With the powerful individual strength of the giant dragon tribe, it was not difficult for them to easily defeat a few human wizards of the same level. In fact, some of the more powerful giant dragons even had the ability to challenge those of a higher level. In this multiverse with high mana, it seemed that only a powerful creature like the giant dragon could have such a heaven-defying ability. Furthermore, through this crisis, the blazing flame monarch had also gotten rid of a hidden traitor. This would undoubtedly be of great benefit to the future development of Grimm's faction. Naturally, there would be rewards after the victory. Grimm personally announced during the celebration banquet that he would be forming a new wizard family, and that everyone present would become the core members of the new family. This included Medusa and the leader of the Chimeras. In the future, they would rid themselves of their identity as wild magical beasts and become official members of a wizard family. As long as this wizard family gained the recognition of the scattered Wizard Tower Forest Association, they would also gain the status of wizards. Under everyone's anticipation, Grimm also announced the name of the new family, Crimson. Grimm was a fire wizard, and he was most proficient in fire spells. Thus, it was fitting for him to give himself the name Crimson. From now on, Grimm's name would become the new Grimm, Crimson. He would also become a powerful Crimson Wizard. The secret room on the 5th floor of the Blazing Flame Monarch. At this moment, Grimm had turned this place into the scene of a mysterious ceremony. While the overjoyed magi and acolytes were still celebrating in the hall on the 2nd floor, Grimm had already brought Mary and Lester here. Alice and the little elf Helen were already waiting inside, having been teleported here from the Tower of Destiny. "It's you again, you thief. You're not satisfied with Alice, and you've even hooked up with a female vampire. Don't you know that those vampires are all perverts?" The moment they met, the elf Helen flew in front of Grimm, wrapped in a glowing ribbon of light. She stuck her hands on her hips and pointed at his nose, her sharp voice scolding him. This sudden accusation left Grimm dumbfounded. He was currently carrying the unconscious Mary in one hand, and Lester, who was bound and unable to move, in the other. Looking at the elf in front of him, who seemed to be in the right, he opened his mouth a few times, but did not know how to defend himself. "Helen, don't show off that specious theory of yours. It's not your place to interfere in our affairs." Alice, who had been standing there with a smile, slowly walked up to the unconscious Mary and asked in confusion, "What happened to her?" "Half a month ago, she absorbed too much of the Thunder Dragon's blood. She's been sleeping all this time, and no matter how I call her, she won't wake up," Grimm explained awkwardly. "She has the blood of vampires flowing in her body, so she needs some special witchcraft facilities. Fortunately, I brought the blood coffin this time. Otherwise, most of the power would have dissipated, and it would have been a great loss for her." Ever since Alice became a Destiny Witch, although she was still as strong in front of others, she was much gentler and calmer in private. The blood coffin was a witchcraft item unique to the vampires. It could help vampires condense and purify their blood. However, due to its high price, only high-grade vampires had the right to use it. Chapter 566. Mary was not considered a pure-blooded vampire. Her appearance was not created by a superior vampire through the embrace. Instead, she was born in a wizard's biological laboratory. Therefore, compared to a real vampire, she was obviously shackled by the bloodline shackles. Under normal circumstances, with her crazy massacre in the Knight's Plane, she should have advanced to rank 2 before Grimm. It was precisely because of the bloodline shackles that her strength had been stagnant. This time, they had successfully captured the source of the bloodline, Lester. As long as Mary could successfully complete the blood purification ceremony, the bloodline shackles in front of her would no longer exist. With her talent, advancing to rank 2 was only a matter of course. Originally, Grimm wanted to personally host the blood purification ceremony and witness Mary's rebirth. From then on, she would walk on the path of bloodline shackles. However, Alice was more suitable than him in terms of qualifications and experience. Therefore, Grimm could only give up his position and give the right to host the ceremony to her. Grimm retreated to a corner of the secret room and quietly watched as the little elf waved her magic wand and released a ray of light. The armor around Mary's body slowly fell off, and her naked body floated down into a strange, translucent coffin. The entire coffin seemed to be carved out of a huge piece of jade crystal. It was crystal clear and beautiful. Lester was placed on the lid of the coffin. The 4 copper dragon heads at the 4 corners of the coffin stretched forward and bit the vampire's body. Blood flowed down the hollow pipes in the dragon heads and slowly entered the coffin. Visible to the naked eye, the bloodlines in the coffin slowly rose up. They submerged Mary's arms, abdomen, breasts, and face. Soon, the sleeping Mary was completely submerged in blood. Alice, who had always loved to look beautiful, had her hair disheveled at this moment. Barefooted, she held a strange soul lamp in her hand and danced a strange and mysterious dance around the blood coffin. Why is it so different from the blood purification ceremony I've read about in books? While deeply puzzled, Grimm's eyes shone as he admired this different side of Alice. Of course, he did not forget to turn on the chip's memory function so that he could enjoy it at any time in the future. However, as soon as the ceremony started, the little elf Helen once again flew in front of him with her hands on her hips. "Shameless guy, what are you still doing here?" The little elf always seemed to have a bad temper. "Are you going to watch 2 beauties dance naked? Get out. Don't disturb Alice's blood moon prayer ceremony." Blood moon prayer ritual? Isn't this a blood exchange ritual? How did it become a blood moon prayer ceremony? Is there a blood moon in the sorcerer world? Grimm could not figure it out. If it's just an ordinary blood exchange ritual, even an idiot like you can complete it. Why would Alice need to specially teleport here? This was the level-up ritual that Alice had specially prepared for that female vampire. Besides, wasn't it easy to get the blood moon? Alice is the Witch of Destiny. If she says it's the blood moon, then it's the blood moon. What's so strange about that? At this point, it seemed that a certain question had poked Helen's sore spot. Although the little elf was reprimanding Grim, her beautiful eyes were filled with tears. Grim's expression darkened. He silently nodded and quietly left the secret chamber. Grim had heard of the Blood Moon prayer ceremony before. It was usually a grand ceremony held when high-level dark creatures advanced in rank. Dark creatures that successfully passed this ceremony could not only purify their bloodline and advance smoothly, but also obtain some special abilities. Moonlit Night Invisibility, Moon Shadow Envoy, Shadow Blade, Moon Fantasy Wings, Moonlight Recovery. These are the abilities that could be obtained through the Blood Moon prayer ceremony. Although they were not heaven-defying, they were all quite useful. Whether it was the ability to hide in the moonlit night, the terrifying critical damage of Moon Shadow Envoy, the strange and hard to defend against Shadow Blade, the fast escape speed of Moon Fantasy Wings, or the super strong recovery of Moonlight Recovery. Any one of them could greatly increase Mary's battle power in the dark. There was always a loss for every gain. If one wanted to obtain additional abilities, they would have to pay a high price. Apart from the large amount of precious resources needed for the ceremony itself, the host of the ceremony had to consume even more. There was no blood moon in the sorcerer world. If Alice wanted to successfully complete the Blood Moon prayer ceremony for Mary, she would have to use her own power of destiny to make this prophecy come true. As a witch of destiny, the only thing Alice could pay for was her hard-earned power of destiny in her own life. This was why the price was high. While Grim was waiting anxiously outside the secret room, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He raised his head and looked through the sturdy walls of the wizard's pagoda, as well as the 200-meter-thick layer of earth. He cast his gaze toward the distant sky. It was late at night, the time when the moon hung high in the sky and the stars dotted the sky. However, at some point in time, a layer of hazy bloody mist had already enveloped most of the horizon, causing the originally bright and silvery moonlight to actually turn into a dizzying and strange bloody color. The mountains were blood red, the ground was blood red, the trees were blood red, even the massive moon in the sky had become blood red. The entire world had become a blood red world. Such a strange scene only existed within 10 miles of the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. Once they stepped out of this area, the black forest and silver-white moonlight would return to their original state. The people in the pagoda were still cheering and celebrating. Only the forest demon Ava, Medusa, and a few other high-level dark creatures could faintly feel that something was different. It was as if their bodies had become lighter, and the energy in their bodies flowed more smoothly. The air they breathed seemed to be filled with an indescribable fragrance of blood. Apart from a few of them, in a secret room on the 3rd floor of the wizard's pagoda, a sweet-looking little girl was climbing to a narrow stone window with great difficulty. Through the long and narrow space, she could sense the radiance of the moon shining down from the blood moon from afar, separated by layers of obstructions. All of the blood moon's moonlight was directed by a strange force into the top level of the wizard's pagoda. There seemed to be a special ritual going on there. The little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, but she had wisdom and thoughts that did not match her age. Sensing the pure energy within the blood moon's moonlight that made her salivate, the little girl tilted her face and bit her tender, white fingers as she pondered for a long time. Finally, unable to suppress her desire for the blood moon's energy, she extended her hand and beckoned. The next moment, the blood moon's energy that flowed endlessly into the top level of the wizard's pagoda suddenly split into a small tributary and guided the energy into the little girl's body. When the blood light entered her body, the little girl immediately beamed with joy. The big sister upstairs has such a good physique, she definitely won't mind if I steal a little of her stuff. If she really does mind, there's still my silly father and clumsy mother who can help me deal with it. Yes, she'll definitely be fine. It was unknown if the little girl was planning for herself or just muttering to herself, but after a moment's thought, she started absorbing the energy without any regard for anything else. How could the changes that occurred in the middle of the blood moon's torrent escape the eyes and ears of Grim and Alice? Alice was the host of the ritual, and she naturally knew the changes in the blood moon's energy that came from her hands. In the instant that the little girl could not help but extend her hand to steal the blood moon's moonlight, Alice suddenly raised her head and looked at the horizon in confusion. She then looked in confusion at where the little girl was. After a moment's thought, she did not react immediately. Grimm was the one who sensed it at the same time as Alice. As the master of the wizard's pagoda, he was undoubtedly the most sensitive to the flow of energy within the wizard's pagoda. When a small tributary of the blood moon's energy suddenly diverged, Grimm immediately sensed that something was wrong and flew into a rage. Someone actually dared to interfere in the wizard ritual that he was protecting. If they disturbed the blood moon prayer ritual and caused Mary's efforts to fail due to the lack of energy, Grimm would definitely explode in anger. Suppressing his anger, Grimm's mental perception followed the tributary of energy and passed through the walls of the wizard's pagoda. It passed through the protective spells and landed on the body of the strange little girl. Who is she? Why have I never seen her before? Grimm's doubts had just arisen, but he quickly understood with the Chip's reminder. This was the room of the forest demon Ava, and he also knew this little girl, as it was Grimm who had given birth to her. But logically speaking, the baby girl that the forest demon gave birth to should only be 4 or 5 months old, while the little girl in front of him was clearly 4 or 5 years old. If not for the fact that the chip's recorded soul ripples matched the information of the spiritual consciousness, Grimm would have suspected that the baby girl had been replaced by someone else while he was away from the wizard's pagoda. What made Grimm even more surprised was that the little girl in front of him already had the mental strength of a quasi-wizard. To have the mental strength of a quasi-wizard at just 4 or 5 months old, this little girl's talent for growth was astonishing. Even though it was a little strange, she was clearly the daughter of Gargamel and the forest demon Ava. Understanding this, Grimm, who was filled with anger, could only suppress his anger and use his authority as the master of the wizard's pagoda to cut off the energy of the blood moon that the little girl was drawing out. Little girl, didn't your parents tell you that you can't steal things from others? Grimm's cold mental pressure shot into the little girl's soul. I'm only warning you this time. If there's a next time, I'll punish you severely. How could a 5-year-old girl withstand the spiritual pressure of a rank 2 magus? Even if she had extraordinary talent, she could not face a powerful level 2 wizard head-on, not even in the aftermath. The little girl was so frightened that she started crying loudly, falling to the ground. Sensing the commotion in her room, the forest demon Ava, who was still in the banquet hall on the 2nd level, immediately rushed back like a gust of wind. She hugged the little girl the moment she entered the room. Amelia, my little sweetheart, my little baby, what's wrong with you? Did some bastard bully you? The forest demon Ava, who was anxious to protect her child, spoke without thinking, leaving Grimm, whose consciousness was wandering around the room, speechless. Ava, take care of your little girl. She's already interrupted Mary's blood moon prayer ceremony. Oh, the ceremony seems to have come to an end. We'll talk about this later. Grimm's consciousness had only communicated with the forest demon Ava halfway when he suddenly retreated in a hurry. At this moment, the little girl Amelia, who was lying in the arms of the forest demon Ava, pursed her lips and muttered to herself, "You've only intercepted a little, and you're already chasing after me. How petty." But when the forest demon Ava hugged her and looked in her eyes, the little girl's expression had already changed to one of fear and unease. Chapter 567. Mary had advanced. Before the banquet ended, Grimm, who had left for a period of time, returned with such an explosive piece of news. The already bustling hall exploded in an instant. A newly established family actually had 2 grade 2 magi, and Grimm, the patriarch of the family, had a secret method to mobilize a grade 2 dragon man and a grade 3 thunder dragon. What did this mean for a newly established family? It meant that the Crimson family was already at the forefront of the many small magus families in the scattered forest, and their basic strength was enough to surpass those mid-sized families. Which of those mid-sized families had not experienced hundreds of years of ups and downs, facing the threat of extinction several times before they had their current stable position? Now, however, a newly established family that had appeared out of nowhere had the same basic strength as them. How could they accept this? However, the Crimson family that Grimm had established was clearly unable to contend against the established Magus families. Most of them were deeply rooted in their own areas, possessing stable hereditary territories and many resources. Even if they failed once or twice, they would be able to make a comeback in the future and return to the mainstream. Grimm's Crimson family, on the other hand, did not have any family assets, nor did they have vast hereditary territories, nor did they have resources scattered all over. Strictly speaking, apart from the blazing flame monarch, the Crimson family did not have any assets or resources in the scattered forest. It was like a tree without roots. Although it looked tall and sturdy, it could not withstand any twists and turns. Once it was knocked down by the wind and waves, it would be extremely difficult for it to make a comeback. If they wanted to expand their territory and resources in the scattered forest where there were many Magus families, they had no other choice but to wage war after family war. With the Crimson family's current foundation, how many wars could they withstand? These were problems that they did not need to consider in the past, but they were now problems that Grimm, the patriarch of the family, had to think about and solve. The Crimson family's current strength was not a big problem in the blazing flame monarch, but if they wanted to continue developing, they would have to expand their territory. In the future, acolytes would have their own training grounds, and magi would have their own training grounds. All of this required the support of a vast family territory. Moreover, as the clan grew stronger, the supply of basic resources would also have to keep up. It was impossible for the family to purchase all the resources they needed from the outside. Even if Grimm had a magic crystal mountain, he would not be able to sustain the expenditure. Sorcerers and apprentices had to consume large amounts of resources to conduct witchcraft experiments. He could try to purchase rare and precious resources from the outside world, but he couldn't possibly buy a large amount of basic resources, right? In this way, finding a suitable location to establish a sorcerer resource point was the most common development model for a normal sorcerer family. It was used to cultivate and raise large quantities of commonly used resources and materials. Seeing the excited magi and acolytes in front of him, Grimm was filled with joy, but at the same time, he felt a sense of heaviness in his heart. The Scattered Tower Forest region was vast and rich in resources. Moreover, it didn't have a huge organization like the three great sorcerers. Therefore, it was the first choice for all sorcerers who wanted to establish their own family. Every year, the number of sorcerers coming and going from the Scattered Tower Forest area was uncountable. There was no lack of talented people among them, and they had established small families or sorcerer organizations all over the place. However, there were only a few who could truly establish themselves in the Scattered Tower Forest and grow stronger. After tens of thousands of years of ups and downs, although the Scattered Pagoda Forest region was vast, every mountain and hill had its own master. On the surface, they all belonged to secular human nobles or rich merchants, but after careful investigation, they would always belong to an old sorcerer family. No matter which territory an outsider touched, it would cause a backlash from the old sorcerer families. If they wanted to stand aloof from worldly affairs, they could only follow Grimm's example and find a place to settle down at the edge of the territory. In this way, the old sorcerers would not have any trouble, but the Dark Forest retaliation was not something an ordinary sorcerer family could handle. If they fell into a prolonged tug-of-war with the wild monsters in the Dark Forest, and the surrounding biological and mineral resources could not be properly developed, any new family would not be able to withstand the continuous loss of blood. When a family's power had weakened to a certain extent, there would naturally be those scavengers who would pick on the weak and devour them in one gulp. Those old Magus families had also used such methods to grow and develop. If Grimm planned to grow according to the normal process of a sorcerer family, he would need to spend hundreds of years dealing with the old sorcerer families and slowly seize the necessary territory from them. This process could not be rushed, and it had to be done step by step. If there were too many unnecessary wars, it would easily cause the old sorcerer families to join forces to retaliate, or the scattered Tower Forest Sorcerer Association to interfere. Therefore, 100 years was still considered a short time. If Grimm did not want to take the risk, he would not be able to do it without 200 or 300 years. When a family had a few scattered territories, they would have the necessary space to set up resource points. Most families obtained their territories through family wars, so they would not be continuous, making it difficult for them to form a firm and stable defense line. Apart from the necessary personnel and acolytes, every family's territory and resource point had to be guarded by a sufficient number of magi. Otherwise, any random wandering magus could bring about a devastating blow to the family's businesses. Without sufficient magi and acolytes, it would be difficult to support the large territories and businesses. Now that Grimm had defeated the Vic family, and the Blazing Flame Monarch was sealed deep underground, he did not have to worry about external organizations interfering in the short term. The Crimson family was established at the right time. Grimm estimated that he would be able to lay low for around half a year. Once this period was exceeded, the outside world would not be able to restrain themselves and would try to probe the Crimson family's foundations. Hence, in this half a year, Grimm had to straighten out the Crimson family's internal structure and determine the direction of the family's development. More importantly, he had to extract enough benefits and resources from the Goblin Plain, turning it into the cornerstone of the Crimson family's rise. The Lightning Dragon arms had already left the Blazing Flame Monarch and returned to Lance. When it left, it had transferred the sole contract with Zacha to Grimm as per their agreement. This way, Grimm had a sole contract with a Grade 2 Draconian and a Grade 3 Brain Monster. With these two hidden helpers, even if those Grade 4 Magi came to the Blazing Flame Monarch to cause trouble, Grimm was confident that he could hold his ground for a long time. The stability of the Blazing Flame Monarch meant that the Crimson family had a foundation that no one could dig out. As long as this foundation was there, no matter how great a setback the Crimson family faced, they would be able to make a comeback one day. As for the Lightning Dragon arms, he had already become Grimm's strategic ally. The reason for their relationship was the gem of the dragon's oath from the Knight's Plane. This was a contract the Green Dragon leader had signed with him in order to gain the trust of the human emperor. In order to avoid tying the Green Dragon tribe to the humans' war chariot, the Green Dragon leader played a little trick when signing the contract. One party to the contract was naturally the Green Dragon tribe, while the other party wasn't the human royal bloodline, but the owner of the gem. At that time, the human royal family was under the Green Dragon surveillance. If there was any trouble, the Green Dragon leader only needed to order his subordinates to snatch the gem, and the contract gem would no longer be binding to the Green Dragons. Who would have thought that Grimm, who had entered the Kingdom of Knights by himself, would be able to snatch the gem away from the dragons? This was a huge problem for the Green Dragon clan. If Grimm found a group of green dragons with the gem, he would have the authority to ask for their assistance in battle. Fortunately, there were millions of planes, and the green dragons were only a small branch of the emerald dragons. The chances of them meeting each other after leaving the Plane of Knights were close to zero. This was why the Green Dragon leader had not gone around looking for trouble with Grimm. The dragon's oath gem did not have much meaning to Grimm. At most, it would allow him to understand some secret knowledge about the green dragons. However, this gem was much more important in the hands of the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms. Just because Grimm couldn't find the green dragons didn't mean that arms couldn't either. If arms could offer this gem of dragon oath to the great dragon god, he would definitely be blessed and rewarded by the dragon god. If he took this gem and ran to the green dragons for free, he might be able to extort some good stuff out of them. Moreover, if he ran into a green dragon branch that had fallen from grace, Arms could use this dragon's oath gem to recruit them, and they would immediately become his dragon soldiers. After all, this kind of dragon's oath gem was very precious to any high-ranking dragon branch. They were not allowed to lose it easily, let alone violate the terms of the contract. Therefore, this dragon's oath gem was not that important to Grimm, But to the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms, it was no less than a free dragon summoning tool. As long as he could find out where the green dragons lived and bring the gem there, he might be able to get a big surprise. Chapter 568. A contract to assist in battle was different from an enslavement contract. The former only stipulated normal assistance in battle, while the latter was a wizard contract that was bound by the laws of the world. The difference between the two was huge. According to the contract, Grimm had to pay a large amount of magic crystals or resources every time he summoned a Grade 3 lightning dragon to assist him in battle. Furthermore, as a high-ranking dragon, the lightning dragon had the right to refuse any battle that was too dangerous. Of course, in consideration of his status as a prisoner when signing the contract, Arms had specially given Grimm a price of 100,000 magic crystals. This meant that Grimm only had to summon a Grade 3 lightning dragon once, and the 100,000 magic crystals in his pouch would disappear. That was not to say that it was too expensive. If he went out and asked around, he would find out that a lightning dragon that could suppress most Grade 3 magi with just 100,000 magic crystals. This was a bargain. If Marquis Hennis of the Vic family could also use 100,000 magic crystals to summon a Grade 3 lightning dragon, he would not hesitate to summon 4 or 5 of them and use the most barbaric methods to flatten Grimm's wizard's pagoda. However, he did not have the ability to do so, which was why his Vic family suffered a calamity. Other than him, who managed to escape unscathed, only the other Grade 2 vampire, Tolly, managed to return to the family. As for the other 11 Grade 1 vampires, they were all annihilated in the Flame Cave. This was a fatal blow to the Vic family. The Vic family had even fallen from the front ranks of the smaller families to the back, becoming the juiciest piece of meat in the eyes of the other Magi families. If Hennis wanted to protect the Vic family, the only way was to pull back the defensive line and transfer the members of the family who were stationed at various places back to the ancient Blood Castle to gather the remaining forces. This was the only way to stop those who had ulterior motives against the family. However, if they did this, the outer territories that the Vic family had spent 500 to 600 years building up would be wasted. Of course, the Vic family might have cultivated some taboo forces in the dark and would be forced to reveal themselves at this time. Grimm, who was safely hiding underground, did not care about all this. He was using this rare period of time to boldly construct the future structure of the Crimson family. Initially, the members of the Crimson family could be split into the core members, official members, and peripheral members. The core members were, of course, the ones who had followed Grimm the longest and had proven their loyalty to him. Currently, only Grimm, Mary, Alice, Gargamel, and Meryl were confirmed to be part of the team. The official members were wizards who had signed a service contract with the family, such as Bliss, Zachary, Ava the Forest Demon, Dracula, Medusa, Karen the leader of the Manticore, Gazruvi the Brain Monster, and Tigula. As for the outer members, they were special talents who chose to serve the Crimson family in certain aspects, but were not completely part of the family. For example, the poison centipede Ender, the goblin cabbie, Sophia, and Chef, the thunder dragon Arms, and the three-headed hound Anguja. As the Crimson family grew stronger in the future, many Magi would come to join them. They would all be outer members, and only those with exceptional performance or loyalty could be promoted to official members. Moreover, since he had spent so much effort to divide these family members into groups and responsibilities, the resources and treatment they enjoyed would also be different. Grimm had used this as a reference to the basic structure and common methods of most Magus families, and had basically built the ruling structure of the Crimson family. As the Crimson family did not have any family assets, all the Magi focused on training and research. They were not given many family missions. Furthermore, the gnome dimension that they had just swallowed had not been fully developed yet. Thus, the Crimson family's only mission was to invest most of their Magi into the gnome dimension, hoping to extract the first bucket of gold from the dimensional war as soon as possible. Mary had just advanced to level 2 and needed to stay in the Fire Monarch to stabilize her mind. Thus, after Grimm gave her the authority to defend the wizard's pagoda, he brought most of the magi to the gnome dimension. To be honest, this was the first time many of the magi in the wizard's pagoda knew that their family had a small secondary dimension. Thus, when they heard the news, they teleported to the gnome dimension with shaky legs and shock. It had to be said that their first impression of the gnome dimension was really, really bad. As soon as they stepped out of the teleportation formation, Dacella, who had a weaker body, was suppressed by the gnome dimension's powerful dimension and suffocating low magical environment. On the other hand, Medusa, Dana, and the leader of the Chimeras, due to their special bodies, had a much better ability to adapt to the environment of another world than human magi. As Grimm's representative, the worm Lich Billis had been stationed at the excavation camp, cooperating with the brain monster Gazruvi to continuously excavate the remaining parts of the steel capital. According to the information sent back by Billis, several tons of metal products and components could be excavated from a depth of nearly 1,000 meters every day. At the moment, they had already excavated 2 small warehouses of the steel capital, obtaining many rare ores and other resources. These were also continuously being transported out, and they urgently needed a large number of people to manage and categorize them, and to turn them into resources that they needed. Grimm pondered for a moment, then decided to let Dacella and Dana take care of the trivial work. The two of them did not participate in the previous plane war, which meant that they did not contribute at all. Now, they could only use hard work as a substitute. Only by doing this would they have the right to participate in the division of resources and benefits in the gnome dimension in the future. Other than the excavation site, Wizard Merrill, who was left behind by Grimm in the gnome dimension, was not idle either. Using this month's time, Merrill, with the help of Goblin Cabby and Tigule, had almost turned the entire gnome dimension upside down. According to the different types of resources, such as plants, animals, minerals, furs, crops, and so on, she had made a rough calculation of the resources, materials, and wealth that the gnome dimension had. Among them, there were more than 3,700 types of rich mineral resources, 250,000 types of plants, 1 million types of animals, 58 types of basic food that could be eaten by living beings, and more than 1,200 types of strange fruits. Such a huge survey of the plane's resources was never done by the Gnome Empire in the past. Therefore, Merrill could only let the governors of the various provinces report the resources in their territories. She then filtered and filtered them, and finally came up with this list of resources in front of Grimm. Faced with such a huge list of resources, even with the AI chip's quick scanning, it took Grimm 7 days to record all of them into the AI chip's database. In the remaining time, Grimm compared the resources of the gnome dimension with the resources of the Magus world, and filtered out the resources that had the greatest difference in value. Since the gnome dimension was a low magic world, the metals, minerals, and plants produced here did not have any elemental characteristics. However, the special environment also resulted in special products. The metals refined from the gnome dimension were generally stronger than the metals of the Magus world. Coupled with some unique physical characteristics, they could definitely be sold for a good price in the Magus world. Moreover, goblin metallurgists were very good at harmonizing the physical characteristics of various metals, turning them into special alloys. These were all rare in the Magus world, and the prices on the market were very tempting. Currently, the consumption of magic crystals for teleportation between planes was still very high. Selling some basic resources across planes was undoubtedly a loss-making business, but it was still profitable to sell these rare resources, and the profits were not small either. Hence, Grimm calmed down and gathered all the magi together. He needed to find the most valuable and profitable resources from the vast list of resources. Once these resources were delineated, he would need to send magi under the guidance of the gnomes to check the origin of the resources to determine the reserves and the feasibility of planting or excavating them. Those that were difficult to cultivate or too rare were all crossed out, and only those that were easy to cultivate or plant were searched. When necessary, Magi would also use some spells to find new ways to plant or cultivate them in large quantities. With such a huge workload, every magus in the Crimson family was extremely busy every day. However, under the temptation of the huge and bright future, everyone worked day and night with high morale. It had to be said that as long as you were willing to put in the effort, you would get 10 or even 100 times the return. When the good news came from the excavation camp, the Magi's resource count had basically come to an end. They had initially determined that there were 25 types of high-value metals and minerals, 17 types of valuable exotic plants, and 103 types of rare resources that were not found in the Magus world. Under Grimm's forceful push, the gnome royal family began to send commissioners to various places to discuss with the governors and leaders of various provinces about large-scale cultivation and development of these resources. In order to prevent the gnomes from slacking off or shirking responsibility, Grimm sent his family magi to almost every gnome province to supervise their follow-up work. After handing over the work to his subordinates, Grimm hurried to the excavation camp. Chapter 569. Inside a large cowhide tent, Grimm saw the remnants of the plain gate that had been excavated. In the middle of the tent, there was a vague outline of a metal arch standing tall, giving all the visitors a lofty, heavy, and oppressive feeling in their hearts. Tall scaffolding and metal platforms had been built in front of and behind the metal arch. Countless goblin technicians and engineers were busy climbing up and down, sweating profusely. At the corner of the tent, there was a huge pile of garbage that was as tall as a hill. Gnomes were carrying bamboo baskets and working hard on it, sifting out all the metal fragments and broken components that might belong to the metal arch that were mixed in the mud and gravel. Some of these metal fragments were bigger than a goblin's head, while the smallest were only the size of a fingernail. After they were sifted out, they would be gathered in the hands of the goblin engineers. With their rich experience, they would determine the authenticity of the metal fragments and their original positions. Grimm stood at the edge of the busy work site, his eyes flashing with blue light. In just a few moments, he had a rough understanding of the damage to the metal arch, the main body of the plain gate. The upper half of the metal arch was the most severely damaged, and it was visible to the naked eye that 78% of it was missing. On the other hand, the legs of the arch were mostly intact, but the metal surface was full of cracks and dents. The original strange patterns were hard to recognize. The terrifying void storm formed by the explosion of the superspatial furnace had also swept through the area where the plain gate was. Fortunately, the plain gate had the protection of an energy field, and it had survived the fiercest part of the storm. It was only because of the huge changes in the ground and the collapse of the underground space that the plain gate failed, and the metal arch was crushed into countless metal fragments. Now, with the goblins' protective excavation and meticulous cleaning, the metal arch once again showed its lofty, mysterious, and proud appearance to the world. Along with Grimm was the supervisor of the excavation site, Worm Shaman Bliss. A few of the goblins in charge of the excavation site were hiding nearby, not daring to come closer, as though they were afraid of Bliss. Only when Grimm reached out and summoned him to his side did the goblin, wearing an exquisite military uniform, loudly report the progress of the plain gate's restoration. Fortunately, the damage to the planar door wasn't too serious. Currently, it was missing 64% of its metal components and 57% of its goblin runes. According to the supervisor's estimation, if the entire underground space was searched and all the metal scraps that could be collected were filtered out, the metal arch would probably be restored to about 83%. As for the remaining 17%, they had either been swept to another plane by the void storm or directly vaporized. It was impossible to find them again. If he wanted the metal arch to be whole again, he would have to reforge these broken parts. With the goblins' powerful construction machinery and metal smelting skills, this kind of work would only take 12 to 15 days to complete. As for the dense goblin runes on the metal arch, there was no problem with the brain monster Gazruvi around. After all, this metal arch door was personally created by him. The dragon race's knowledge witchcraft runes, and goblin technology were all stored in his gigantic brain. Truth be told, even when Grimm threatened it with his life and tempted it with wealth, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon still refused to divulge the dragon race's mystical knowledge and the plane of Lance where it grew up. When it transferred the Grade 2 Draconid Zachary's soul contract to Grimm, it had also erased Zachary's memories of the Lance World Waymark. Hence, Grimm had no choice but to place his hopes on the planar door and Gaz Ruvi. Truth be told, the Thunder Dragon arms probably didn't expect that the terrifying explosion did not completely destroy the planar door. More importantly, Gaz Ruvi was still alive. As long as Gaz Ruvi was around, even if the planar door was completely destroyed, they could still reforge it within 6 to 7 months. But now, with a ready-made metal arch fragment, this task could be completed within a month. This was also the day when the first magic furnace that Grimm and Gaz Ruvi had created was completed. In the past, the old goblin Gaz Ruvi was limited by the severe lack of magical metals in the goblin plane, so he could only do his best to produce Kaira's alloy. Now, with Grimm's strong support, 10 tons of magic iron alloy and a large number of special metals with outstanding magical resistance were transported over from the sorcerer world. With the support of such a powerful backing, the brain monster, Gazruvi, relied on his data processing and fuzzy processing abilities that were thousands or even tens of thousands of times greater than before. Under Grimm's guidance, he began to optimize and adjust the previous design of the magic furnace on a large scale. Moreover, the explosion of the superspatial furnace had accidentally created a mana source. Its addition would undoubtedly increase the power of the new magic furnace by more than 10 times. The more powerful the magic furnace was, the more powerful the magic iron alloy was needed to support it. Therefore, these days, the brain monster Gaz Ruvi had opened up a small alchemy laboratory in the floating warship he controlled. He was constantly experimenting with new types of magic iron alloy materials. The magic furnace he had predicted to be built with the latest materials would be completed at the same time as the repair of the planar door. This also meant that after being equipped with the magic furnace, Gazruvi would be able to use the planar door to launch an attack on the Lance plane where Thunder Dragon Armstrong was. This was also the second planar war that Grimm was about to experience. A month later, a large number of goblin construction machines were transported to the excavation camp, and the place had once again become a bustling city of metal machines. Strangely shaped metals were excavated from the ground and piled up into a small hill. Even more shiny and huge metal ingots were transported from the goblins' various provinces. Apart from that, a large number of construction machines and battle magic machines were also arranged in rows, forming a mechanical army of more than 10,000. Further away, there were goblin or smelting factories, construction machines, battle magic machine, assembly workshops, and other workshops unique to the goblins. All the materials and equipment had been prepared, and they were just waiting for the 10-meter-tall metal arch in the center of the camp to be completed. After more than a month of repair and polishing, the metal arch that was riddled with scars now looked brand new. The surface of the metal arch that was shining with a faint blue metallic luster was densely covered with strange and mysterious patterns. These strange patterns were not useless decorations, but the goblin rune technology that Gazruvi had created by combining the knowledge of 3 civilizations. However, the main character today was not the cold metal arch, but the giant floating ship that was hanging high above the camp. The Crimson family's wizards gathered in the center of the field, looking at the bottom of the giant floating ship that was slowly descending. When it was less than 100 meters away from the ground, the giant floating ship stopped descending. Instead, a hole silently opened up at the bottom of the ship, and an irregular metal object that was 5 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 3 meters tall slowly floated out of the hole and slowly descended. The magic furnace. The wizards present could not help but feel excited as they looked at the metal object that was getting closer and closer. The excitement in their hearts was indescribable. Even though it was not big, it had a terrifying energy capacity and endurance that far surpassed the wizard's pagoda's elemental altar. According to the current data, The amount of magical energy it absorbed from the dimensional void at every moment was 100 times that of the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda, and it wasn't any different than Alice's Wizard Pagoda of Destiny, which stood tall in the Northland. If it was equipped with the legendary magical power spring, the magical energy output might immediately become the sum of the energy of all the origin towers of the Northern Witches. When that time came, as long as it was equipped with sufficiently powerful wizard facilities and magical equipment, who could defend against its crazy bombardment. Moreover, it should not be forgotten that the Wizard's Pagoda was fixed on a certain node of the Earth meridians, and it was difficult to move it. But the magic furnace could be moved to any battle facility at will, including the giant floating ship in front of them. A giant floating airship that could cruise around the world. This was the main reason why Grimm was willing to help the brain monster Gazruvi build this super magical furnace. Where's the brain monster? Meryl looked around for a long time, but did not see Gazruvi. She could not help but ask her teacher curiously. Grimm did not answer her, only pointing at the magic furnace with his finger. Meryl closed her eyes again to investigate, and only then did she faintly sense the faint ripples of Gazruvi's consciousness amidst the violent magical energy within the magic furnace. It put itself into the magic furnace. Meryl's beautiful eyes widened, unable to believe her senses. The brain of the brain monster was already as big as a hill the last time she saw it. How did it compress itself into a ball and stuff it into the magic furnace? Meryl could not help but let her imagination run wild, and her mind was filled with bloody and cruel scenes. It's not as scary as you think. A smile appeared on Grimm's young and handsome face, as if he had seen through Meryl's thoughts. Gazruvi created a clone of his main brain and transferred most of his main consciousness into the clone. That clone is only the size of a normal human brain and is suitable to be placed in the magic furnace. However, Grimm's gaze had already landed on the giant floating ship. Ever since Gazruvi placed his main brain in the magic furnace 3 days ago, the subbrain he left outside has begun to expand and grow uncontrollably. Currently, Grimm paused for a moment. Its new brain has almost filled up the remaining space in the floating ship. It's already so big. Meryl raised her head and looked at the huge floating ship that had almost taken up her entire field of vision. Her face once again showed a hint of disgust. I've already discussed with it. The huge underground cavity left behind after the excavation will no longer be filled, and will instead be used as a place to store and protect its subbrain. After all, there's a constant layer of radioactive dust outside, and ordinary creatures will not be able to get here. This place is suitable for it to grow. Meryl looked around. After the excavation was completed, there was a huge underground space with a circumference of 20 to 30 kilometers and a depth of a few thousand meters. The brain monster intended to use this place as a residence for its subbrain. Just how big was it planning to grow? Meryl felt goosebumps all over her body. Chapter 570. When the magic furnace slowly descended to the ground, Grimm finally nodded to the magi around him. In the next moment, as the magi chanted spells in unison, the channeling spell formation carved under their feet began to light up layer by layer. It resonated with another mysterious spell formation thousands of meters underground. Grimm floated above the channeling spell formation. With a wave of his hand, the huge and heavy magic furnace slowly floated in front of him. Go in. Grimm held the magical furnace in his hand and brought it along with him into the channeling spell formation. In the next second, they appeared thousands of meters underground. What appeared in front of them was the source of mana that had almost condensed into a stone ball. After more than 2 months of nourishment, the mana within the source of mana was so dense that it was almost solid. A faint magic mist shrouded the surroundings of the stone ball, and every magical creature that approached it could feel the energy aura rushing towards them. Now that they were here, the brain monster Gazluvi no longer hid his existence. As the magic furnace trembled slightly, Gazluvi's spiritual force surged out like the sea and mountains. With an aura that could devour the world, It dispersed the stone ball in one fell swoop and reached into the slowly rotating void vortex at the source of mana. In the end, Gazluvi was also a type of magical creature that had mutated. Apart from some simple spiritual force, it did not have any combat power. When its spiritual force and the void of energy tangled together, the magic furnace and the void vortex began to violently tremble at the same time. All right, you can start now. Gazluvi had obviously used most of his spiritual force to fight against the void of energy. He barely managed to separate a thread of spiritual force to maintain a spiritual connection with Grimm. With Gazluvi's knowledge and ability alone, it was impossible for him to move the void of energy in the slightest. It could even be said that the native creatures of most planes could not move the wild source of mana. Only the powerful sorcerer world, which had conquered and conquered too many lower planes, had the relevant sorcery knowledge and techniques. Therefore, even if Gazluvi had the strength of a Grade 3 Magus, he could only ask Grimm, a Grade 2 Magus, for help if he wanted to move the source of mana into his new body. Therefore, the brain monster Gazruvi tried his best to penetrate the energy void while quietly waiting for Grimm to make his move. Along with the muttering of a strange incantation, a gigantic and mysterious spell formation appeared on the ground where the mana source was located. Countless magic lines and runes appeared one after another, and in the blink of an eye, the huge crypt was dyed into a sea of light. Under the guidance of the rune array, the singularity that was fixed at the core of the energy void suddenly ejected endless energy particles, forming a violent stream of particles that corroded everything, corroding the already huge cave and making it even more spacious and spacious. The brain monster, Gazruvi, was hiding in the magic furnace. It was protected by the toughest and most malleable special magic iron alloy. Naturally, it would not be harmed at all. On the other hand, Grimm had also conjured up layers of flame shield, and the particle flow around him lit up like fireworks. The spatial singularity didn't have any mass to begin with. It was just a mysterious spatial node that connected the planar space to the outer realm. Ordinary creatures didn't even have the right to touch it, let alone take it away like a gem. However, as a magus, Grimm had directly purchased the mysterious spell formation related to the mana source from the Silver Alliance at a high price. Even with Grimm's knowledge, it was difficult for him to analyze the spell formation's principles and methods. He could only use his spiritual force to drive the mysterious spell formation. However, the mysterious spell formation that he had purchased at a high price really worked. As the energy particles exploded and erupted, the motionless spatial singularity actually floated towards the magic furnace under the guidance of the spell formation. It really worked. Grimm and the brain monster Gazruvi couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Seeing that the starting point of the spatial singularity was getting closer to the magic furnace, Grimm's spiritual force skyrocketed, and he instantly transformed into a Balrog. A 7-meter-tall Balrog made of flames and lava appeared on the scene. In the next moment, a flame rune that contained part of Grimm's soul brand suddenly appeared, and along with the spatial singularity, it floated towards Gazruvi's main brain in the magic furnace. What were you doing? Seeing that the magic furnace and the spatial singularity were about to fuse, Grimm actually did this, and the brain monster Gazruvi couldn't help but scream. You're Grade 3, and I'm Grade 2. Now that you've fused with the magic furnace and the spatial singularity, your strength will definitely skyrocket. I can't guarantee that the soul contract we set up before will still be able to restrict you. So, Grimm, who had transformed into a terrifying Balrog, bent down, and a gentle smile appeared on his face that was covered in flames. Either accept this new soul brand or die here. It's your choice. The brain monster Gazruvi fell silent. Apart from the direct threat of the Grade 2 fire wizard in front of him, the brain monster Gazruvi also sensed that there were a few guests on the giant floating ship on the surface, and one of them was the Grade 2 Dragon Man Zachary. From the looks of it, if it didn't agree to Grimm's request, the Magi on the surface would attack at the same time, and the Magi would want to eradicate it completely. Although it had become a grade 3 brain monster, it didn't have any combat power. It had to rely on its metal body and combat equipment to fight with people. Before this, the fire wizard had been telling it about the various benefits of having the magic furnace. It also advised Gazruvi that before it could assimilate the magic furnace and the spatial singularity, it had to maintain its spiritual power at its peak. It was not suitable for it to have too many magic equipment. At this moment, Gazruvi finally understood his opponent's intentions. At this time, even if it wanted to resist, with the giant floating ship that had most of its magic equipment removed, the damage it could cause to the other party could be counted on one hand. Moreover, the other party had fully understood its strengths and weaknesses during this period of contact. The moment they attacked, they would kill it with a thunderous blow and would not give it any chance to escape by splitting its brain. After understanding this, the brain monster Gazruvi felt even more resentful and aggrieved. As a grade 3 creature, it had been completely tricked by a group of grade 1 and grade 2 magi and could only close its eyes and wait to be enslaved. This feeling of grievance and depression almost made it go berserk. Looking at the spatial singularity and the flame rune that were getting closer and closer, the brain monster Gazruvi's emotions became more and more complicated. One was something that it could not wait to possess, and the other was something that it could not wait to blast into pieces, this kind of witchcraft rune that was directly branded on the soul. As long as it gathered a spiritual power, it could be destroyed in an instant. However, it could only watch as the other party floated over bit by bit, and then slowly integrated into the soul consciousness of its main brain. Every time it mustered up a bit of courage to resist the other party's enslavement, the moment the spiritual power took shape, it could not help but imagine the scene of its brain being torn into pieces by the Magi's wild witchcraft storm. Although it was already a grade 3 brain monster, in essence, its soul was still inherited from a cowardly goblin who was greedy for life and afraid of death. When the two side-by-side options of extreme power and losing its freedom were presented to it at the same time, it could not overcome Gazruvi's fear and cowardice towards death. It mustered up its courage countless times, and also thought of countless escape plans to survive in the face of death. However, the 93% death rate meant that it could only watch as time passed slowly, until the flame rune and the spatial singularity completely fused with it. When the spatial singularity and its consciousness completely fused, and once again stabilized in the core space of the magical furnace, a wave of void energy that was even more powerful and violent than before gushed out, continuously scouring the rock walls and soil around the cave. Countless energy particles that were like stars in the sky infected everything around the cave, turning it into energy crystals that lingered with a brilliant radiance. Following the continuous ejection of the energy particles, the thickness and density of the energy crystals increased rapidly. Grimm used his spiritual force to scan the area, and Chip's feedback surprised him. The huge cave had only been infected by the magical furnace for a minute, and the surrounding rock layers and soil showed signs of turning into magic crystals. According to the Chip's calculations, even if this magical furnace was not used for other purposes and was only used to produce magic crystals or magic crystals, it could still produce 300 magic crystals a day. This meant that it could produce 3,000 magic crystals. Grimm's blazing flame monarch wizard's pagoda could only produce 8 magic crystals or 15 fire crystals a day, even if he shut down most of its magic facilities. Compared to the magical furnace, the elemental altar in the blazing flame monarch's energy chamber was simply trash that could be discarded, not even worth mentioning. Sensing the slave contract that had completely fused with its soul, the brain monster Gazruvi could feel the endless energy surging within its body, but it still could not be happy. Go up. Seeing Gazruvi obediently submit, Grimm's attitude towards it became much better. There's still a lot of food left for you up there. Perhaps it wanted to use its violent actions to vent its pent-up anger. The magical furnace suddenly shook and floated upwards without Grimm's help. It floated upwards, ejecting energy all the way. After all, Gazruvi only had one magic furnace heart, and it did not belong to his body. Therefore, 99% of the energy could not be released and could only be released in the form of energy particles in a disorderly manner. Chapter 571. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a terrifying energy storm slowly rose from the underground space. Although the wizards already knew that Gazruvi was hiding in the storm, they still couldn't sense his exact location through the violent and disorderly energy, even after using all kinds of methods. Just as the wizards couldn't help but sigh silently at the miraculous fusion between Gazruvi and the magic furnace, the goblins hiding in the periphery were looking at the former number 1 goblin with the mentality of a pilgrimage. He was the smartest goblin in the world, and he was also the god of the goblins. He had crossed the level threshold that tens of thousands of goblins couldn't successfully cross, becoming the first goblin to advance to level 3 in the multiverse. Alright, although Gazruvi's current appearance was too different from goblins, he was still a goblin, wasn't he? With all sorts of complicated emotions, the goblins knelt on the ground, worshipping the god of the goblins who brought them endless suffering and endless hope. The power of the god was increasing, and the will of the god was flowing. They hoped that the powerful god of the goblins would in turn protect the poor goblins who were being enslaved by the wizards. With the strengthened mental ability, Gazruvi could almost accurately detect the mental, emotional, and mental changes of all living beings on the scene, except for the wizards who were blocked by the life force field. When he thought that his strength came at the cost of losing his eternal freedom, Gazruvi's anger couldn't help but burn. His mental consciousness attached to the energy particles, and together with it, infected every piece of land and every inch of space in this world. With the high penetrating characteristics of the energy particles, his mental consciousness could almost pass through any material form without any hindrance. Whether it was soil, rocks, wood, or metal, nothing could stop Gazruvi's mental consciousness from penetrating and sensing it. At this moment, everything in the world was completely transparent in his eyes. There was no secret in the world that could hide from his mental perception and spiritual touch. The violent energy extracted by the magical furnace from the void of the outer realm at every moment became its most powerful weapon, as well as the best carrier for its consciousness. After rising into midair from the cave space, the core of the energy storm that was continuously sweeping and spreading suddenly lit up with a blinding, terrifying light. The next moment, tens of thousands of energy particles that rode on Gazruvi's will rushed out in all directions like gusts of wind. They pierced through earth, stone, metal, and wood. There was nothing that could stop them from piercing through, and there was no living thing that could stop them from passing through. Even the Magi of the Crimson family felt an indescribable pressure on their souls. They could not help but gather together and cast spells that targeted the soul and mind. The mind was formless, and the mind did not have any fixed form. However, people like Gazlu, who combined the intangible spiritual consciousness with the tangible energy particles, formed their own unique spiritual light. The mental light was like rays of pure white light, twisting and turning in the air and penetrating into every metal ingot, every construction machine, and every battle magic machine in the camp. In the process of the constant bombardment and penetration of the energy particles, Gazruvi's spiritual consciousness also began to become omnipresent and omnipotent. These huge metal ingots, which were originally inanimate objects, began to become soft and moldable like mud under the control of a powerful force. The huge metal mountain at the edge of the camp was mostly excavated from the underground and was once a part of the City of Steel. There were also some metal ingots brought in from the outside world. At this moment, no matter where they came from, they had now become metal dough that kept twisting and deforming. They twisted and twisted with each other, condensing into a larger and heavier metal dough. Then, strange parts that looked like tentacles and mechanical legs extended from the metal bodies and began to approach each other and stick to each other. Just like a small droplet fusing into a large droplet, the metal lumps gathered together and began to fuse into an even larger and more intimidating giant metal creation. Not only the metal mountain, but even the construction machines and battle magic machines in the mining camp began to move under the control of Gaz-Ruvi's spiritual consciousness. At the same time, the alchemy workshops, and magic machine production lines at the far end of the camp suddenly had many goblin technicians running out in panic. Then, the huge metal factories also suddenly grew many metal mechanical legs and began to crawl over like metal beasts. For a moment, the entire mining camp was filled with horrifying metal creations that twisted and wriggled. They twisted and deformed while using all kinds of strange means to meet and fuse together to form even stranger and more unique metal creations. Metal spiders, metal beetles, metal wolves, metal ooze monsters, and many other strange creations whose specific forms could not be seen. Lifeless metal would twist and deform into a strange mass that no one could recognize, but the construction machines, battle magic machines, and engineering workshops with fixed forms would not be so wasteful. They still retained their original basic form and slowly fused with other metal creations. Small water droplets gathered into big water droplets gathered into streams, and the streams finally condensed into a metal giant that could support the sky. There was a head, a body for limbs. The surface of the body was uneven, and there were traces of fusion and splicing everywhere. But no matter what, this terrifying metal giant that was 217 meters tall finally stood in front of everyone. After the metal giant was formed, Gaz-Ruvi controlled the magic furnace to slowly float towards the thickest part of the metal giant's chest. As the magic furnace slowly approached, a black hole appeared in the metal giant's chest, and it was sucked in. After waiting for a moment, as the magic furnace connected to the internal energy circulation system of the metal giant, the lifeless colossus suddenly came to life. Violent and ferocious magical energy circulated in the metal giant's body, activating one goblin factory after another and lighting up the construction machines and battle magic machines. The entire metal giant's body emitted a faint fluorescent light that was unique to magical metals, and it propped up an invisible psychic force field. As the huge energy flowed in the metal giant's body, the metal body that was just roughly assembled a moment ago began to change and become more detailed and lifelike. The rough and crude spherical head of the metal giant began to rise and fall, and more obvious eyebrows and facial features had already appeared. Although these things were just decorations and did not have any functions or effects, they were much more pleasing to the eye than before. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but the metal giant's eyebrows actually looked very similar to Grimm's. However, the metal giant was too huge. Even when Grimm was right in front of it, he was only as thick as its lips. The few magi from the Crimson family gathered together and could not help but discuss. The metal giant in front of them was huge enough, but they did not know how strong its attack and defense would be. Grimm had already flown out of the ground and slowly landed beside them. Death's Cellar, try attacking it, Grimm ordered. As Meryl's disciple and Grimm's disciple, Death's Cellar was an elemental magus who had an affinity with the wind element. He had become a magus only 7 years ago. As he had always been quiet and did not like to interact too much with others, he did not stand out in Grimm's camp and did not have much of presence. However, his existence also meant that the Crimson family's power could continue, so Grimm had recently begun to place his attention on him. Yes, Patriarch. Death's Cellar was an old-fashioned magus who did things according to the rules. His thin, pale face always had a formal smile on it. His body was weak, and his mannerisms were elegant but not pretentious. One look, and anyone could tell that he was a typical noble magus from a noble family. Under Grimm's elemental vision, Death's Cellar's entire body was shining brightly. There were no gaps in his equipment that could be worn. It was obvious that he was from a rich family. After being called out by Grimm, Deathseller flew up from the ground and hovered in midair. The equipment on his body began to light up one by one, giving him many buffs. When he stretched out his hands, invisible wind vortexes began to merge between his palms, forming a terrifying wind blade. Due to the lack of elemental energy in the goblin plane, Deathseller's spell casting took a full 7 seconds before he reached his peak. With a light shout, a wind vortex that looked like a sharp cone flew out of his hands. It traversed nearly 100 meters and hit the metal giant's soul force field. The invisible soul force field began to ripple slightly, and very quickly, Deathseller's attack was neutralized. 85 degrees. The AI chip immediately reported the strength of the attack, considering that this was the goblin plane and that he was just a newly advanced magus. It was commendable for him to have such a strong attack. If this was the magus world, his attack would have been close to 100 degrees. Grimm had used the AI chip to optimize his spells and the explosive power of his fire element spells, but he had only managed to reach 105 degrees. In comparison, Deathseller's research on wind element spells was quite good. Although Deathseller's attack did not break through the metal giant's soul force field, it had obviously attracted Gazruvi's attention. The metal giant bent its body slightly and turned its head. A pair of true light, like a pair of searchlights, shone towards Deathseller. It was difficult for a rank 1 magus to break through the metal giant with Gazruvi guarding it. But what about a rank 2 magus? Grimm waved his hand, and a magma fireball the size of a human head formed at his palm. It began to absorb the surrounding fire elemental energy to strengthen itself. The metal giant's gaze was immediately attracted by the fireball. Gazruvi, don't move. Let me test it out. Grimm communicated with the metal giant, and with a push of his hand, the magma fireball in his palm streaked across the sky like a meteor and landed on the metal giant's soul force field. In the next second, sparks flew in all directions, and magma burst forth. Chapter 572. 286 degrees. According to the feedback from AI chip, the core area of the explosion had an attack power of 286 degrees. Ever since Grimm had advanced to rank 2, even though he had not taken the time to study and strengthen his fire spells, the elemental power contained in his attacks was still increasing at a crazy rate. It was the same lava fireball, but the Tier 1 lava fireball and the Tier 2 lava fireball were 2 to 3 times more powerful than the Tier 2 lava fireball. With Grimm's current spell strength, a single lava fireball could instantly kill a newly advanced wizard who had been buffed with all his defensive spells. Taking Wizard Deathseller as an example, he had been a wizard for 7 years. Every day, he was either busy with witchcraft experiments or witchcraft practice. He had only mastered 2 defensive witchcraft, Wind Barrier and Gale Rampart. The former was mainly defensive and could provide 150 degrees of wind defense and 40 degrees of physical defense. The latter was both offensive and defensive, and could provide 120 degrees of wind defense and 90 degrees of physical defense. It could also move the enemy's body and deflect their close-range attacks. Combining the two, he could at most defend against 270 degrees of instantaneous attack, and this was a wind-type defense. If the opponent's instantaneous attack did not reach this level, the 2 layers of protection could cover and protect each other, preventing the wizard from being hurt by the enemy's attack. Moreover, in between the enemy's attacks, the wizard could also inject some wizard power into the defense to restore a certain degree. This was also the main reason why a single defensive spell could protect a wizard safely, even though it was so weak. However, Grimm's instantaneous attack had already exceeded the upper limit of the 2 layers of defense. The most direct result was that the defense would be broken, and the wizard would have to bear the remaining damage. If it were Medusa or the Chimera leader Karen, with their strong magical body, they would naturally be able to easily withstand the aftershocks of the attack and would not suffer much damage. However, as a human wizard, his weak body had always been the biggest weakness. Without the protection of witchcraft, even a 10 or 20-degree witchcraft attack could cause terrifying fatal damage. Moreover, the statistics did not take into account the characteristics of the elements. Both of Decella's defensive spells were wind-type, so they could only be used to defend against wind-type attacks. If the opponent used other elemental attacks, the defensive effects of Wind Barrier and Gale Rampart would be greatly reduced. In this way, Grimm's 286-degree lava fireball would be able to instantly kill Decella, who had her full defense. But when such a fireball hit the psionic field on the surface of the metal giant, it only caused it to tremble and shake violently. It did not shatter directly. Moreover, when the flame shockwave subsided, with the infusion of Gaz Ruvy's psychic power, the protective force field that was on the verge of breaking actually became stable again, just like how it was in the beginning. Beep! Detected spirit defense field, elemental defense strength 320 degrees, no physical defense. The AI chip statistics sounded in Grimm's mind. Due to the existence of the defensive force field, Grimm could not see through the metal giant's internal structure and basic defensive capabilities. However, from the damage caused by the attack, the AI chip could roughly estimate the level of the metal giant's defense. As a Tier 3 exotic beast, a 320-degree force field was indeed a little weak. However, considering that he had just gained control of his body, and that the force field protection was an all-encompassing, all-domain type protection, the strength of this protection was still acceptable. Gaz Ruvy, what's the strength of your attack? Now that the strength of the metal giant's defense had been tested, Grimm needed to understand the strength of his opponent's attack. Hearing Grimm's question, the metal giant stretched out its 5-meter-thick right arm, and a black cannon with a diameter of 3 meters suddenly appeared in the center of its palm. In the next second, the magic furnace's energy burst forth, and a terrifying magical energy was transmitted through a special pipe into the right arm. The pitch-black muzzle was instantly enveloped by a blinding, intense blue light. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk following the sizzling sound of a strong electric current. A terrifying chain of blue lightning shot out and struck a steep mountain 5 miles away. The violent elemental lightning exploded, and in an instant, the solitary mountain peak was smashed into smithereens and shattered into pieces. In the core area enveloped by the lightning element, everything, be it soil or sturdy mountain rocks, was instantly vaporized. Only a portion of the mountain peak in the periphery of the lightning element barely managed to survive. Lightning attacks were the fastest of all elemental attacks, and they also had a paralyzing aftershock of lightning. However, for a mountain peak that was insulated from lightning, the shockwave had no other effect other than smashing down more rocks and gravel. The mountain peak was originally like a towering cake, but now that the middle part of it had been bitten off, the remaining portion could not support the weight of the top. Finally, after a dozen or so twists and turns, the remaining portion of the mountain began to collapse bit by bit. Although it was 5 miles away, the collapse of the mountain caused the ground to shake violently, and a huge cloud of dust was raised, causing the goblins and wizards to be shocked. They might not be able to estimate the strength of the metal giant's attack, but the AI chip in Grimm's mind could accurately calculate the strength of the attack. 853 degrees. It was a terrifying strength that left him speechless. In the sorcerer world, the attack strength of a grade 1 sorcerer was usually below 200 degrees, and to put it bluntly, most of them were below 150 degrees. Only those peak grade 1 sorcerers who were ready to break through to grade 2 could reach more than 150 degrees. The attack strength of a grade 2 sorcerer was usually between 200 to 400 degrees, and only those extremely powerful grade 2 sorcerers could surpass the threshold of 400 degrees. On the other hand, the attack strength of a grade 3 sorcerer was between 300 to 1,000 degrees. Due to the different directions of development, the individual's growth would be different, and the disparity in combat strength would also be shocking. Powerhouses at this stage were usually 2 to 3 times stronger than ordinary sorcerers. As for attacks above 1,000 degrees, That was the terrifying might of a grade 4 sorcerer. However, this kind of data did not take into account the sorcerer's combat techniques, battlefield environment, individual condition, and the illusory element of luck, so the data could only be data. In a battle between two wizards with similar statistics, the outcome of the battle still depended on the specific situation and environment at the time. There was no absolute winner or loser. However, no matter how powerful one's combat techniques and killing methods were, in the face of absolute data, they were still powerless and pale. Even if Grimm's combat techniques were 10 times or even 100 times better, it was still impossible for him to survive the metal giant's terrifying attack of 853 degrees. Fortunately, the AI chip gave Grimm some feedback, and he heaved a sigh of relief. The metal giant, controlled by Gaz, Lu, would need at least 3 to 5 seconds to gather energy, and when it was charging up, it would have an obvious electric effect. When Grimm discovered that the metal giant was charging up energy, he only needed to avoid the area covered by the metal giant's cannons, and he would be able to escape the subsequent fatal attack. However, if he was locked in place for some reason, even with Grimm's defense, he would not be able to escape the fate of being killed in one hit. 853 degrees. This kind of power was enough to penetrate all of Grimm's defensive spells and vaporize him completely, in the area covered by the lightning storm. Even if Grimm transformed into a Balrog, he would not be able to survive such a terrifying lightning attack. After the metal giant released the lightning attack, it slowly lowered its right arm. The metal arm that had just been hit by the violent energy was now glowing red, and thick smoke was billowing out. It was obvious that the metal giant could not continuously release such a powerful attack. Moreover, before the next attack, it would need to repair and maintain its body to a certain extent. This discovery also caused Grimm to lower his head and ponder. Gazel, I remember the last time you attacked me on the floating warship. That attack was even more terrifying than this one, and it was more than 1,000 degrees. Why is it so weak this time? Grimm communicated with Gaz, Lu using telepathy. Master, if you want to obtain stronger attacks, you need to obtain stronger magic iron alloys. The materials used to shape my body are too common. If I charge it for more than 5 seconds, the giant magic cannon in my body will directly disintegrate without having to attack the enemy. As if he had understood his own identity, the brain monster Gezruvi was unprecedentedly honest. Apart from energy attacks, what other special abilities do you have? Master, apart from the 2 magic cannons in my body, there are 100 magic cannons, 1,000 arcanite muskets, 100 high radiation flame throwers, 1,000 goblin fire arrows. These are the most basic weapons. Apart from that, I also have 136 engineering machines and 672 combat magic machines. These are the most basic combat units. On top of that, I also have 2 goblin trade factories in my body, which can create simple goblin weapons. 2 metal or smelting workshops, which can smelt metal ores nearby into metal components that I need. 1 magic equipment crafting workshop, which can continuously produce battle magic equipment as long as I don't lack magic iron alloy. Currently, I can produce 15 basic magic equipment every day. However, these metal factories cannot operate in battle mode. I need to find a suitable place for me to switch to defensive mode. Only then will I have enough energy and space to operate. Battle mode, defensive mode. As someone who had transmigrated from ancient Earth, the strange appearance of the MCV immediately appeared in Grimm's mind. Chapter 573. Lance Plain. It was an extraordinarily beautiful small plain. The entire plain was made up of continuous swamps, hills, plains, forests, lava volcanoes, and vast oceans. In terms of surface area, Lance Plain was more than twice the size of the Goblin Plain. It was rich in biological resources and had an astonishing amount of metal ores. Since Lance Plain was a high magic plain, its magic crystal reserves and magic resources were countless times greater than those of the Goblin Plain. In this vast land, the giant demon clan was the most widely distributed and had the largest population. They had many branches of their own clan. They were a race with an average height of 7 feet, about 2 meters, and a weight of 200 pounds, about 90 kilograms. They had huge skeletons and developed muscular strength. They were adept at using poison javelins and spears, and had many enviable racial abilities such as berserk, regeneration, beast killer, and throwing weapon specialization. In some large troll tribes, there would be some witch doctors with special voodoo abilities. They had mastered some of the more primitive herbs and voodoo techniques. Before the horrendous invasion, the trolls were the undisputed masters of lance playing. In fact, during the peak of the troll race, they had even built a troll empire that left one speechless. Unfortunately, everything came to an abrupt end in 1207 of the voodoo calendar, with the arrival of a large group of dragons that soared high in the blue sky. The history of the troll ruling the plain came to an end. The giant dragon alliance easily destroyed the capital of the great demons and massacred their army. The huge troll empire fell apart in an instant and was divided into hundreds of territories and territories of various sizes by the dragons that came later. According to rank and strength, a rank 4 dragon could occupy a territory of nearly 1,000,000 kilometers, while a rank 3 dragon could only occupy a territory of 100,000 kilometers. As for the giant dragons of even lower levels, they could only occupy 1 or 2 villages or a large troll tribe as their own fiefdom. From there, they could live the life of a lord who had everything he needed. In the early days of the Dragon Lord's rule, in order to suppress the resistance of the troll race, they consciously nurtured a group of dragon descendants mixed with the local bloodline, the Dragonborn. The Dragon Lords were all sleeping soundly in their palaces or lairs that they had built with their wealth and gems, while the Draconid servants who possessed their bloodline were responsible for maintaining the order in their territories. These Draconians were the loyal servants of the Dragon Overlords. They were usually in charge of taking care of the Dragon Overlord's daily life in the palace or the dragon's lair, and would occasionally run to the troll tribes in the territory to collect their offerings and offerings. Due to the Draconids' powerful individual ability and the elemental power granted to them by the dragon bloodline, some small trolls rebelling did not even need to alarm the dragon lord before they were dealt with by the few Draconid warriors or scouts. That was why there was a high and mighty dragon overlord and lance, the Draconians in the middle, and the trolls in the upper food chain, where they were oppressed and ruled miserably. As for the other tribes that weren't as strong as the trolls, they became the targets of the trolls' plunder and oppression. Since the giant dragon lords were either going out to play or sleeping in their nests, they almost never considered the spread of the dragon race's civilization. That was why even though the dragon lords had ruled lands for thousands of years, the local natives were still crude and ignorant, living the lives of primitive people with no clothes to cover their bodies and food to fill their stomachs. There was almost no sign of civilization in the entire Lance Plain. Dragon Calendar, year 1723, 11th of April. It was a mysterious day that would never be forgotten. In a swamp that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, a huge portal of light slowly opened. As the light above the portal shook, a tall, hazy, and illusory figure gradually became clear. It had a half-human, half-dragon body. Its upper body was that of a naked adult male, draped in golden bronze armor and wielding a lightning spear. Its lower body consisted of 4 thick limbs covered in azure scales, and at the end of each limb were fearsome, powerful dragon claws. Behind the Draconid was a flat, thick dragon tail that was also covered in dense scales. In the entire plane of Lance, Draconids were the rulers who held power over life and death. With their powerful bodies and terrifying elemental energy, a Grade 1 Draconid could easily slaughter a primitive tribe of hundreds of people. A Grade 2 Draconid like Zacha could even become a dragon emissary in a large troll tribe that had tens of thousands of people. That was why when they saw Zacha's highly recognizable Draconid appearance, the scavengers and hunters hiding in the nearby swamps couldn't help but tremble in fear, and they all began to flee. For native tribes like them, they were most afraid of dragon emissaries like the Draconids. Once a dragon emissary came to visit, it usually meant that a year or even several years of the tribe's wealth would go down the drain. These dragon emissaries were usually muscular and simple-minded, and they didn't have any intuitive concept of numbers. They wandered around their territories casually, ordering any tribe they encountered to hand over food, metal ores, magic gems, and all sorts of strange items. As for the quantity, it was just a random number they made up. If it was just 1,000 kilograms of dried meat, the extorted tribe might still be able to complete the task after tightening their belts. However, if the emissary casually said 1,000 kilograms of magic gems, the extorted tribe wouldn't be able to gather such a terrifying amount, even if they sold everything they had. That was why trying their best to curry favor with the dragon emissaries was the only way for every tribe to survive. As for killing the dragon emissaries and rebelling against the tyranny of the dragon race, they only had to think about it. Once someone couldn't hold back and attacked the dragon emissaries, what awaited them would be the complete annihilation of the Draconid army. Draconid Zacha patrolled the hot and humid swamp with heavy footsteps. In this sludge formed by the accumulation of decaying things, every time Zacha's sturdy lower limbs stepped on it, spots of mud and smelly black water would splatter. Within his line of sight, there were black puddles of various sizes and a hazy mist that lingered for a long time. Places that were slightly further away were often shrouded in a veil-like mist, hazy and difficult to see clearly. Suddenly returning to the plain where he grew up, the relief that came from the bottom of his heart made Zacha feel extremely happy. However, when he thought of the mission he shouldered, he couldn't help but feel heavy in his heart and walk with difficulty. The Draconids, who had always regarded loyalty as their only creed, had never had traitors or betrayers. They would rather lose their lives than lose the glory and pride of being a Draconid. However, as a Draconid slave under Lord Arms the Thunder Dragon, Zacha was gifted to a human wizard by his master. This unprecedented matter left him confused and bewildered. Who was the person he was loyal to? Was it the Lord Dragon Lord who gave him his bloodline? Or was it the human wizard who had signed a soul contract with him? Zacha's soul was at a loss. He was pondering and searching for an answer. However, before he could find an answer, his new master had already sent him to this homeland that he yearned for even in his dreams. Breathing in the turbid and dirty air here, Zacha still felt relaxed even though the environment here was completely different from Lord Arm's territory. After letting his heart relax a little, Zacha returned to the teleportation gate with heavy footsteps and sent out the signal that everything is safe as promised. After waiting for another 15 minutes, ripples appeared on the light gate. The space ripples were so dense that they formed a sea, and a gigantic metal monster curled up and squeezed out of the narrow transmission space. The body of the metal monster was too big compared to the 10-meter-tall teleportation gate. Even though it had tried its best to shrink its body, twisting its metal shell into a soft octopus-like metal monster, it was still very difficult and painful to pass through the light gate. If its huge body exerted too much force, it would break the void of the plane and attract violent void hurricanes. Faintly discernible dimensional fragments densely surrounded the metal monster, constantly devouring its metal shell. Some huge dimensional cracks wandered around, and wherever they went, the metal monster's metal shell that was several meters thick was cut into pieces without any resistance. But even though it was difficult to pass through the environment, the metal monster still squeezed into the inner part of Lance without hesitation. Under Zacha's protection, it took the metal monster a full 3 hours to squeeze out of the crack in the teleportation gate. This barbaric action caused indescribable damage to the metal monster. Just the metal shell that was cut into pieces and devoured by the dimensional cracks took up more than 31% of its body. When a metal monster dragged its battered body out of the light gate finally shattered into fireflies all over the ground and completely disappeared. In the next second, Gazruvi, Grim, Ender, Bliss, Dracula, Dana, and the other wizards who were hiding in the metal monster could not help but let out a muffled groan at the same time. They all felt the endless malice of this world. The suppression of the plane came uninvited. Although the Lance plane was a typical small plane among the thousands of planes, the mana aura here was very active. It was clearly a high mana environment. From this, it could be seen that after the dragons occupied this world, they had carefully changed the plane's laws, creating a near-perfect backyard for the dragons. Otherwise, with Lance's level, there was no way it could have such a strong mana presence. As the main fighting force sent by the Crimson family to Lance, the wizards, including Gazruvi, had suffered a serious decline in strength. Before they slowly adapted to the plane's laws, they could not provide much combat support. However, the metal body controlled by Gazruvi was obviously not on the list of plane suppression. Chapter 574. This should be the legendary Swamp of Sorrows. If we head north from here, we'll reach the Wyvern Mountain range where the rank 3 Dragon Lord, Eugene's Dragon Nest, is located. If we head east from here, we'll reach the territory of the rank 4 Dragon Lord, Iveraquax, in about 11 days. If we head south from here, we'll reach the territory of the rank 3 Dragon Lord, Casada, in about 8 days. The reason why we've been traveling southwest is because the west and south of the Swamp of Sorrow are either Tier 2 or Tier 3 Dragon Lords. Overall, the Swamp of Sorrow is much weaker than the other directions, Sherfong explained. At this moment, the metal monster had already transformed into a spider golem under Gazlervi's command. With heavy footsteps that shook the earth and mountains, it sprinted towards the southwest of the Swamp of Sorrows, one pond at a time. Along the way, the giant metal spider had obviously attracted the attention of countless swamp races and native magical creatures. They either chased the metal spider from behind or pounced on it, viciously tearing at its 3-meter-thick metal limbs. Gazlervi did not retaliate against these brainless, low-grade creatures under Grimm's strict orders. He only minded his own business and ran with large strides, passing through the nests and habitats of countless swamp creatures. Under the lead of the native Zacha, most of the land the metal spider passed through was unclaimed territory. This way, the advance party of the Magi would not attract any enemies that were difficult to deal with. The metal spider did not go on a killing spree, and thus did not cause panic among the intelligent races along the way. Although they were extremely puzzled by such a giant metal monster passing by their tribe, as long as it did not display any obvious hostility, they would not panic and run to report to their dragon lords. This would obviously give the advance party of the Magi some precious time of freedom. Relying on the metal spider as a means of transport, the Magi and Zacha could naturally hide on the tall metal back of the spider golem, resting while waiting for their strength to recover. At the same time, they discussed enthusiastically about their upcoming journey. To the Goblin Plane, Lance was a higher plane that was countless times more powerful than them. Although Grimm and the rest came from the Magus world, which was even more terrifying than Lance. The Crimson family was a small Magus family that had only been established for 13 days. It was wishful thinking for them to swallow Lance whole. Any random Tier 3 Dragon Lord in Lance could easily annihilate Grimm's small Crimson family team. This was why Grimm had the guts to force his way into the Lance plane. He did not rely on a wizard, but on the brain monster, Gazruvi. No, to be more precise, it was the Metal Fortress and the Magic Machine Legion under the control of the brain monster, Gazruvi. Coming to the territory of the giant Dragon Lord and shouting about killing was simply a brainless act of courting death. That was why Grimm would never do such a thing. Instead, he would keep a low profile. As the vanguard of the Crimson family, their mission this time was not to conquer territories or capture dragons, but to survive. If Lance was a unified plane with a strict and effective governing structure, Grimm would not have set foot in this plane. It was because he had a deep conversation with Zacha that he completely understood the structure of society and the hierarchy of power in Lance. That was why Grimm had made up his mind to enter the Dragon's Pool. Lance was a plane governed by feudal lords with a loose power structure. Dragon lords of various sizes were scattered all over the place. Every giant dragon lord only cared about the resources and wealth in their territory. They would never care about anything that had nothing to do with their territory. That was why Grimm and his team's strange behavior in Lance would only attract the attention of a few envoys from nearby giant dragon lords. Once they found out that the intruders had left their territory and ran into someone else's territory, they would immediately return to their homes and take a nap. As for whether the intruders would wreak havoc in the territories of other giant dragon lords, sorry, that had nothing to do with them. The dragons would only laugh at the sight of their weak companions suffering misfortune and running to them to complain tearfully. They would never abandon their lairs or palaces to avenge them, unless they had a close bloodline connection or belonged to the same race. The giant dragons would rather hide in their lair and sleep than travel tens of thousands of miles to do something that did not make up for the loss. It was precisely because he understood the strange nature of the giant dragons that Grimm gritted his teeth and came up with this plan. Of course, it was the existence of Zacha, a native of this plane, that made him make up his mind. If Grimm and his subordinates didn't have the guidance of the natives of this world, they might accidentally stumble into a Tier 4 Dragon Lord's territory. No matter how lazy the dragons were, they wouldn't ignore such a massive threat. Even the thought of being ganged up on by a Tier 4 giant dragon and a group of powerful draconians sent chills down Grimm's spine. The metal fortress controlled by Gazruvi could easily defend against a Tier 4 giant dragon, and the magic cannons hidden in his body were also a threat to the giant dragons. As long as he could solve the logistical problem, Gazruvi would be an invincible existence in any plane. What kind of logistical support did Gazruvi need? The first thing he needed was a large amount of metal, an endless supply of magic metal. Therefore, the first thing Grimm and his party did after crossing over was not to plunder or find a place to hide. Instead, under the guidance of the Grade 2 Draconid Zacha, they went straight to the mountain range near the teleportation point that had the richest mineral deposits. Stoneclaw Mountains. This was a wide mountain range located 36,000 kilometers southwest of the Swamp of Sorrow. The metal mines here were rich and famous even in the western regions of the giant dragon continent. However, there was only a Tier 2 giant dragon lord residing in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Even without the metal monster, Grimm's team of wizards would not be afraid of such a small character. Grimm's plan, coupled with his extreme desire to increase his strength, led to this trip to the otherworld. Stoneclaw Mountains. This was a huge mountain range that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Due to the steep terrain and dangerous terrain, it was rarely visited by humans. Standing on top of a mountain with two peaks, one could see the majestic Stoneclaw Mountains stretching into the distance. Steep and majestic cliffs and precipices could be seen everywhere, most of them covered with dense coniferous forests. All kinds of strange birds soared between the mountains, displaying an admirable vitality. Wind dragon shacks crouched on a huge platform in front of the dragon nest, looking down at the magnificent scenery while waiting for news from afar. 2 days ago, his subordinates at the edge of the territory sent back news that a huge metal monster was heading towards the Stoneclaw Mountains with unstoppable momentum. They tried to stop or force the monster to change its route, but unfortunately, they suffered heavy casualties without any results. Left with no choice, the Dragonkin servants who served the Wind Dragon could only summon up the courage to wake up Chax. Chax, who was disturbed from his sweet dream, was enraged. He devoured the Tier 1 Dragonkin, who woke him up, and only then did he have the mood to listen to what they had to say. Of course, what awaited him was undoubtedly the worst news that could not be worse. For the past 2 days, all the native tribes in Chax's territory had been mobilized to stop the metal monster's advance. Unfortunately, apart from a series of defeats, there was no good news. The grim situation had forced Chax to no longer lie down in the dragon nest. He could only pretend to be calm and wait for news from afar. According to the reports of his subordinates, this terrifying metal monster had escaped from the Swamp of Sorrows, which was the hereditary territory of another dragon lord. Therefore, Chax could only send his trusted subordinates to the palace of the giant dragon lord to inquire about the origin of this metal monster. However, considering the giant dragon race's history of procrastination, it would not be surprising if the messenger found the giant dragon lord in a deep slumber and waited for a year or two. Therefore, Chax did not dare to place all his hopes on his giant dragon neighbor. He sent a large number of his subordinates to follow the metal monster's path into the Swamp of Sorrow, hoping to find out something from the natives along the way. Just as the Tier 2 Wind Dragon Lord Chax was lowering his head in deep thought, a cloud of dust suddenly rose from the edge of the mountain range in the distance. Large flocks of birds soared into the sky and let out shrill cries. Ugh! What happened? While he was puzzled, a group of harpies flew over from the forest in the distance. They landed at the foot of the Twin Peaks mountain and flew into the camp of the Dragonkin army. A moment later, the strongest warrior of the Dragonkin army, the Tier 2 Dragonkin Beano, rushed up the Twin Peaks mountain with a few of his subordinates. "My lord, not good, not good. That metal monster has arrived." Even with Beano's physique, rushing up 1,000 meters in one go was a little too much for her. She panted heavily as she quickly reported the news to the Wind Dragon Chax. Wind Dragon Chax blinked his strange, olive-colored eyes quickly. Without turning his head, he stared into the distance and asked, "Are the enemies coming here?" "No, no." Beano scratched his head in distress. According to the harpies, the metal monster changed direction as soon as it entered the mountain range. "It's going straight where?" "Straight to the Jasper Mine." Chapter 575. The Jasper Mine. It was a large metal mine located at the edge of the Stoneclaw Mountains. The ones working hard in the mines were the cave spiders and the hill dwarves. They obtained the ownership of the mine from Lord Chax by handing over a certain amount of metal ores on a regular basis. Such a rich metal mine was right under the nose of Dragon Lord Chax, but almost turned a blind eye to it. Other than mining a small amount of metal ores to build magic armor for his dragonoid subordinates, there was almost no other use. As for building an iron empire, digging out the precious metal resources and selling them to other planes of existence, this kind of trade thinking had never appeared in the mind of the Dragon Lord. Back then, the reason why Chax agreed to let the dwarves and the spider sect dig the Jasper Mine was mainly because of the accompanying resources of the metal ores, the magic gems. Charles was not interested in the dark, heavy metal ores that took up a lot of space. However, it was these metal ores that Chax usually did not care about. At this moment, it had attracted a terrifying enemy that was hard to resist. After listening to the report from his subordinates, the Rank 2 Wind Dragon Lord Chax stood high on the lone peak. His sharp claws tightly gripped the edge of the stone platform. He leaned forward slightly and looked down at the forest below him. He raised his neck and let out a loud and long dragon roar. Wherever the dragon roar passed, the whole forest was in chaos. Countless birds and beasts came out of their nests and fled to the periphery of the Twin Peaks without looking back. The dragonoid camp at the foot of the mountain let out a short and loud roar in response to the dragon roar. Soon, groups of tall and majestic draconians clad in metal armor and wielding long-handled battle axes charged out in an orderly formation. There were 102 rank 1 berserk dragonoid warriors. Disregarding the dragon envoys who were distributed to various places to collect taxes, these dragonoid warriors were all the power that Chax could muster. The violent fighting spirit of the dragonoid warriors had obviously deeply stimulated this Wind Dragon Lord. If the enemy had just passed through his territory, Chax might have pretended to be deaf and mute and turn a blind eye to the other party's power. But now, the enemy seemed to want to set up camp at the edge of its nest. This was something that could not be ignored no matter what. So, bending over to look at the vigorous posture of his dragonoid legion at the foot of the mountain, Chax the Wind Dragon once again raised his neck and let out a deafening roar that shook the mountains and forests. Then it spread its wings and flapped the huge greenish-gray dragon wings on its back. Its thick hind legs pushed off the ground, and it swooped down. The Wind Dragon was the master of the sky. When the 10-ton heavy body moved on the ground, it looked lazy and clumsy, but when it flew into the air, its body was wrapped in layers of translucent wind barriers, and the terror and agility of the wind dragon were undoubtedly displayed. When other giant dragons spread their wings and soared in the sky, they always gave people a feeling that they were not agile. However, when the wind dragon soared in the sky, it had the agility and flexibility of a fish playing in the water. The wind dragon chacks swooped down, and when its huge body was close to the ground, it suddenly pulled up again. When it passed over the dragon men, it could not help but raise its head and let out a long and loud dragon roar. The dragon men immediately cheered. They raised their huge and ferocious battle axes high, saluting their lord as they spread their hooves, and followed the wind dragon to the jasper mine at the edge of the mountain. However, at this moment, the metal spider had transformed into a strange metal monster. Welcomed by the axes of the hill dwarves and the venom of the cave spiders, it came to the entrance of the jasper mine without any hindrance. The entrance of the jasper mine was less than 2 meters high, and obviously, it could not be entered by its huge body. So, the metal monster stretched out a thick metal tentacle to block the entrance. Thud, thud, thud. In one breath, it shot out a squad of up to 30 combat magic machines into the cave. As for the small trash and small characters hiding outside the cave, the edge of the metal monster's body suddenly cracked open, and metal pellets shot out from it. Powered by magic energy, the arcane gold gun of the goblins had been reforged, and now it had a terrifying lethality that was far beyond what it used to be. Wherever the terrifying metal pellets went, they pierced through wood and shattered stone. Even when they hit a thick mound, they would raise a huge pillar of dust and leave a deep hole in the ground. The hill dwarves, who were only 2 meters tall, obviously didn't have any good metal armor. Hence, their bodies of flesh and blood were instantly riddled with holes under the rapid fire of the flintlock, losing their lives. On the other hand, the cave spiders were agile and fast, and ordinary guns could not kill them in one shot. So, a few tunnels opened up under the metal monster's huge body, and a few spider puppets rolled out. Spider versus spider. Thus, the two completely different spider creations began to fight each other outside the jasper mine. The main weapons of the cave spiders were their sharp fangs, sharp limbs, and the spitting of acid and venom. But these were almost no threat to the fully metal spider puppets. The metal spider moved its clanking legs and quickly approached its opponent. A few metal pipes suddenly extended from the disc-shaped protrusions placed at the top of its oval-shaped body, and a powerful flame was sprayed onto the bodies of the surrounding cave spiders. Grilled spiders. Almost in an instant, the cave spiders that had gathered at the entrance of the jasper mine to protect their nests suffered heavy losses. They were all roasted into piles of black charcoal by the high temperature of the flames. After easily taking care of these hindrance trash, Gazlervi's soul whisper echoed in the minds of all the wizards. "Sit tight, I'm going in." As more than 10 mechanical arms with high-speed rotating drills extended from the metal monster's body, the mine where the jasper mine was located had obviously encountered a terrible disaster. With a deafening roar and the forceful pressure of the metal monster, a huge hole was pierced through the mine, and the body of the metal monster gradually disappeared in a huge cloud of dust that soared into the sky. Just as the metal monster was struggling to drill into the depths of the mine, a long and loud dragon's roar suddenly came from the depths of the Stoneclaw Mountains. Along with the dragon's roar came a slight tremor and a deafening roar. The wind dragon and its dragonoid army had arrived. "I'll leave them to you." Grim muttered to himself for a moment before giving Gazlervi a battle order. "Don't expose the existence of a magus if you can." "Understood." Gazlervi was now much more obedient than before. "It's just a rank 2 dragon. I'll just chase it away." With its identity as a rank 3 brain monster, it was no exaggeration to say such words. With the metal monster and the magical weapons hidden within its body, dealing with a rank 2 wind dragon that had just matured was not a problem. If the terrain was suitable, it might even be able to capture the dragon alive. Hence, After receiving Grimm's order, the metal monster did not stop its drilling. It even increased its pace, as if it had the intention of burrowing into the ground. The wind dragon Shax flew high above the Jasper mine, looking down at the mess below it with widened eyes. It was not that it felt sorry for the worthless miners, but it was extremely surprised by the ferocity of its enemy. The enemy did not seem to have any intention of getting along with it, a dragon lord. As soon as it arrived, it started destroying the mountain. From the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to drill into the mineral veins beneath the mine. Under the frenzied drilling of the huge metal monster, a large hole with a diameter of 100 meters had been dug out of the mountain. Half of its body had already sunk into the mine. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Shax cursed crazily. It was obvious that the enemy had ignored its existence. To a giant dragon lord, this was undoubtedly a blatant slap to the face. Unable to bear it any longer, Shax roared and folded its wings. Its slender body was like a sharp sword as it dived down from a height of 500 meters. The dragon was here. Of course, the wind dragon Shax's every move in the sky could not escape Gazlervi's spiritual senses. When he saw the enemy diving down, Gazlervi stopped his digging and ordered his huge body, which was like liquid metal, to prepare for battle. The manufacturing facilities in the metal monster's body were sent into the mine, and most of the magical weapons were moved to the side, exposed outside the mine. The uneven metal body had now become as smooth as a mirror, like a metal wall that had integrated with the mine. Suddenly, countless holes appeared on the wall, and black muzzles were exposed, aiming at the huge figure that was getting closer and closer. What? What is this? The wind howled, while its body was still diving down. Chaxlervy's huge eyes were already wide open, looking at the strange behavior of the enemy in confusion. Although it did not understand what the enemy was trying to do, with the keen intuition of a dragon, an indescribable intuition of death suddenly rose from the depths of its dragon soul. It would definitely die if it charged straight down like this. This feeling came so abruptly that it was even a little skeptical. Just when it was still hesitating whether to straighten its body or continue diving down to give the enemy a short-distance dragon breath spray, Chaxlervy's sharp vision suddenly captured hundreds of suddenly lit magic convergence points. The speed at which the enemy gathered magic and the level of energy was so high that it simply left it speechless. The wind dragon was scared out of its wits, and it began to flap its wings desperately, trying to change its flying posture. Damn it! Chapter 576. Shax felt like it was going to die. Its nimble body was wrapped in layers of wind barriers. While dodging the oncoming energy beams, it constantly spat out short bursts of dragon breath to offset the damage caused by the dissipating energy. But even so, its thin and sturdy body still couldn't avoid being eroded by the powerful energy ripples. More than 100 energy attacks, with an intensity of more than 100. The energy beams collided and refracted in the air, making it increasingly difficult for Shax to dodge. Most of the time, it was hit head-on by these irregular diffuse and refraction attacks. The wind barrier outside its body could effectively deflect most of the attacks. If there were only 2 or 3 such attacks, with its nimble body, it would only need a light flap of its wings to escape from the opponent's attack path. Unfortunately, it was facing over 100 energy light pillars today. The other party clearly intended to use this area of effect attack to make it unable to dodge or evade. Part of the wind barrier outside its body was deflected, and the fine dragon scales on the surface of its body blocked part of it. However, the remaining energy waves were still far beyond the limits of a Tier 2 dragon. The flesh covered by the dragon scales was severely corroded, and basin-sized dragon scales fell off piece by piece, revealing the unbearable charred flesh underneath. Tendons were scorched, flesh was corroded, bones were brittle, and blood was splattering everywhere. When wind dragon Shax finally broke out of the sea of light with a long and shrill cry, its robust body had been riddled with holes, and its flesh was badly mutilated. Large patches of dragon scales and wounds could be seen everywhere. Dragon blood rained down from the sky, and the air was filled with a pungent stench. Its huge dragon wings were also torn, and it could no longer ride the wind like before. The simultaneous firing of 100 magic cannons was no less than the simultaneous casting of 100 Tier 1 wizards. Although Chax the Wind Dragon was a Tier 2 dragon, and its body and physique far exceeded that of ordinary monsters, it still ended up in a terrible state. But after a moment of carelessness, it was baptized by the opponent's concentrated fire, and it still ended up in a tragic state. Only the WYRMS had the power to break free from the death trap. If it had been someone else with weaker magic resistance, they would have been turned into sieves and died without a complete corpse. Chooks dragged his broken body and wailed mournfully as he struggled to get out of the range of the energy beam. Because it flew too fast, its half-burnt dragon tail even slammed into the cliff wall, rubbing against the falling rocks. In just one round, the ferocious Gazlurvi had used a super firework to cripple the Wind Dragon Overlord. The Wind Dragon Overlord could only howl and flee into the distance. At this time, Chax's Dragonborn army broke through the forest and appeared in Gazruvi's sight. Even though the Dragon Lord had been routed, the Dragonoid army continued their charge towards the huge metal wall under the lead of the Dragonoid. Soon, the deafening rumble of arcane gold muskets echoed in the battlefield. Metal pellets that were as dense as rain streaked across the battlefield that was almost 200 meters wide, striking the Draconids' metal armor and dense draconic scales. The thumb-sized metal bullets created dense sparks on the Dragonoid's body and the Dragonoid's arms, face, waist, and abdomen, which lacked the protection of protective gear, splattered with blood. The Dragonoid's muffled groans of pain rang out incessantly. With just a torrential barrage of bullets, Gazruvi had kept the hundreds of Dragonoid warriors at a distance, making it difficult for them to advance. By the time the Dragonoids pulled out metal shields from their backs and were about to charge again, the magic cannons had finished their cooldown. The 100 terrifying cannons adjusted their angles slightly, and with a flick of a finger, a terrifying energy beam covered the entire Dragonoid army. The Dragonoid warriors did have strong physiques and inherited the extraordinary magic resistance of the WYRMS, but the level of their resistance was clearly not comparable to that of pure-blooded WYRMS. Just now, Chax the Wind Dragon had withstood over 100 attacks without dying, but the Dragonoid warriors clearly could not do the same. A single volley of magic cannons had killed almost half of the 102 Grade 1 Dragonoid warriors and the Grade 2 Dragonoid Legion commander. It was a tragic sight. Even so, the Dragonoids' perseverance and loyalty continued to motivate them. Under the leadership of the battered Dragonoid Legion commander, they continued their assault against the dense barrage of bullets. 2 consecutive volleys of magic cannons had also damaged the energy pipes in the metal monster's bodies. While quickly repairing the pipes, the metal monster opened the metal wall and released 200 battle magic machines into the battlefield in one go. Thus, under the cover of the dense barrage of bullets, the 200 combat magic machines clashed with the Dragonoid Legion. There was no need for cheering or cheering. The moment the two sides clashed, it was a battle to the death. In terms of size, the Dragonoids were much taller than the combat magic machines, but their weight was about the same. One side was a muscular monster, while the other side was unyielding and unafraid of death. As such, the battle had reached its climax as soon as they regrouped. At this point, by Nuaw, the Tier 2 Dragonkin Legion commander had already gone berserk. Ignoring the bloody holes on his body, he brandished his massive battle axe and shattered 2 combat magical weapons that pounced at him. The sturdy mechanical body of the battle magic machine exploded into countless parts and sparks. However, there was not a single trace of flesh or bone fragments. This unexpected discovery made Bino's heart sink. The metal monsters they were fighting were not controlled by intelligent life forms. No wonder they were so fearless. Using the lives of his comrades, to fight these metal monsters that had no sense of flesh and blood. As the Legion commander, Bino could not help but hesitate. As the mixed-blood descendants of the Wind Dragon bloodline, the Dragonoids were able to cast Gale and Whirlwind Tornado. As the battle raged on, Dragonoids could be seen emitting white light from time to time, increasing their speed and slashing at the combat magic machines, sending sparks flying and parts flying. However, these combat magic machines were clearly difficult to deal with. As long as their bodies were not damaged to the point where they could no longer fight, they would drag their sparking bodies and continue fighting. Most of the time, the combat magic machines that had lost the ability to attack would rush forward and use their broken arms or legs to entangle their enemies, creating better opportunities for the other combat magic machines around them to attack. Be it the close-range arcane gunfire, the rolling flame jets, or the ear-piercing buzzing of chainsaws, they all dealt great damage to the Dragonoids who were wearing primitive metal armor. There were not many Dragonoids left in the first place, and almost all of them were injured. Now that the Dragonoid Legion that had always been known for their bravery could not hold on any longer against the combat magic machines that outnumbered them. As the Dragonoid Legion commander Bino bellowed, the remaining 20 to 30 Dragonoids roared and unleashed their most powerful whirlwind tornado. It was only when the streaks of small tornadoes formed a chain and stopped the enemy's advance that they retreated from the battlefield with their horrifying bodies, quickly disappearing into the distant forest. When the last Dragonoid disappeared into the distance, the battlefield that had been filled with blood and flesh a moment ago instantly became silent. Only the dying Dragonoids who were too heavily injured to get up were left muttering. Meanwhile, the combat magic machines that were bathed in blood just now had also turned into the servant army that cleaned up the battlefield. They worked carefully and seriously, not only sending their wounded comrades back to the bodies of the metal monsters, but also picking up the remains and metal parts that were left on the battlefield and sending them back. In the end, Gazruvi even sent engineering machines to scoop up the Dragonoid corpses and flesh that had been beaten into a bloody mess and reclaim them. This time, apart from the basic magic machine factory, Gazruvi had also brought along the metal or refinery. The magic machines that were too damaged to be used could be reforged, and, at the very least, large amounts of metal and some rare resources could be recovered. As for the Dragonoids, Gazruvi also retrieved them, dead or alive. From Bliss, Gazruvi unexpectedly obtained some methods of making flesh puppets. Together with the insect Lich, combining the Dragonoid's flesh and bones with the mechanical body of the magic machine, it was entirely possible to create a different kind of flesh magic machine. Although the combat ability of the flesh magic machine could not be higher than that of the combat magic machines that were made of metal, it could greatly reduce the current situation of lacking metal ores. In a short 15 minutes of battle, the Dragonoids had abandoned nearly 70 of their comrades and fled in panic. On the other hand, they had paid the price of nearly 100 combat magic machines. From this ratio, it could be seen that the basic combat ability of the Dragonoids was far above that of the combat magic machines. However, if one considered that the birth and growth of the Dragonoids were difficult and that it was not easy to nurture them, the combat magic machines could continuously walk down the assembly line as long as there were enough metal resources and the magic furnace could still operate. From this point of view, the cost-effectiveness of the combat magic machines was far higher than the Dragonoids. However, the weapons used by the combat magic machines needed to be more thought. After chasing away the Dragon Overlord and its Dragonoid army, there was nothing that could stop the metal monster from obtaining the metal ores it wanted. Digging continuously, the metal monster only stopped after digging for more than 200 meters and nearing the periphery of the metal ores. Using its unique methods and means, the metal monster directly dug out an underground space with a circumference of 1 kilometer. With this space, the metal monster spread out its metal body and used it as the foundation, walls, and dome of the new metal fortress, forming a rough framework. Following that, there are crushing workshop, or screening workshop, or smelting workshop, engineering workshop, magic machine manufacturing workshop, Special factories and workshops filled every corner of the new fortress in a picturesque manner. One by one, the engineering machines rushed out of the metal fortress like diligent worker bees, excavating the nearby metal ores. Large amounts of unfiltered metal ores were stripped from the metal or deposit by drills and alchemy explosives and continuously transported into the factories. The magic furnace that Gazruvi was residing in also became the power core of the new metal fortress. Through thick energy pipes, magical energy was continuously sent to every engineering facility to support their work day and night. Chapter 577. It only took a day for a huge metal fortress to be built at the bottom of the mine. The rumbling mining machines shuttled back and forth, transporting tons upon tons of high-quality metal ores from the underground to the metal fortress. Inside the metal fortress, conveyor belts ran from beginning to end, first transporting the crude metal ores to the ore crushing field. There, large and small metal ores were all thrown into the rumbling or crusher. When they came out from the next track, they had already become uniform-sized and granular metal or powder. Then, after many layers of screening and filtration, the soil and plant residues mixed inside were washed away, and what was left were ores with extremely high metal composition. Before these ores were sent to the smelting workshop, there were many mechanical arms at both ends of the conveyor belts, picking out the rare metal ores and magic gems and placing them on other belts. The entire process of crushing, filtering, sorting, and transporting the ores was completely automated by the mechanical arms. At the entrance of the last process, a battle magic machine would rumble down the assembly line every 15 minutes and join Gazruvi's magic machine army. After a few battles, Grimm and the other wizards were no longer interested in these low-grade magic machines that relied on numbers to exhaust the enemy's strength. They had the strength of a Grade 1 Dragonoid, but in actual combat, they would need 3 to 4 times the number to defeat or kill a Grade 1 Dragonoid. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to threaten a Tier 1 sorcerer without at least 5 to 10 Dragonoids. From this gradual decrease in strength, it could be seen that the creatures of the lower planes were greatly exaggerated. That was why the wizards who had shut themselves in their rooms had nothing to do. Naturally, they gathered together and began to study the upgrade and modification of battle magic machines. Desiera was a well-deserved proponent of violence. He felt that the only reason why low-grade magic machines could not be used on the battlefield was because of the lack of heavy weapons that could threaten higher life forms. If magic cannons could be installed on the magic machines, it would undoubtedly increase their power. However, with the size of the magic machine, the amount of mana it could carry was limited. If it was installed with a magic cannon that consumed a lot of mana, it would probably become a pile of scrap metal after 2 or 3 shots. No matter how many of these magic machines were made, they would never be able to travel too far away from the metal fortress. They would not be of much use. These days, poison centipede Ender had been spending time with the voodoo doll Grimm had been cultivating. He hid in his secret chamber all day long, concocting all kinds of plagues and poisons for the voodoo doll to swallow. A while ago, the voodoo doll had inconceivably evolved a strange voodoo halo. This time, the voodoo doll also became a voodoo doll. Wherever it went, ordinary people who were not protected by witchcraft would be poisoned to death as soon as they stepped into the voodoo halo. Then, under the influence of the bizarre voodoo poison, they would evolve into terrifying servant corpses full of plague poison. This kind of servant corpse had extraordinary strength, sharp claws, and was fearless of death. Their bodies were filled with all kinds of plagues and poisons, and they had the basic strength of a beginner apprentice. Although it wasn't very strong, it was more than enough to be used as cannon fodder. Of course, there was also a success rate for this kind of servant corpse to evolve successfully. Basically, the more intelligent and powerful a creature was, the higher the success rate of evolving a servant corpse. For example, the basic conversion rate for humans was about 30%, while for goblins, it was about 15%. This also meant that if Grimm ventured into a foreign plane alone, just the voodoo doll alone would be able to create an army of fearless servant corpses for him in a short period of time. After Ender's training, the voodoo doll basically had the strength of a quasi-wizard. If it could successfully evolve into a wizard in the future, then the servant corpses it produced would also become stronger. However, the voodoo doll's evolution was not stable, and it could only maintain a close soul connection with Grimm within a few dozen miles. Once the distance was more than 100 miles, only a vague soul connection would be left. Therefore, Grimm could only keep it by his side at all times, and could not use it as a completely independent entity. As for modifying low-level magic machinery, Poison Centipede Ender's opinion was even more radical. She even suggested that she concoct a more contagious and lethal super plague and spread it through these low-level magic machinery to further weaken the strength of the natives of Lance. Grimm could only listen to such a suggestion and did not dare to take it seriously. Right now, they were hiding in the metal mine, and the only enemy they had to face was a Grade 2 wind dragon. If they really did as Ender suggested, they would definitely attract the attention of all the dragon lords in the Lance Plain. At that time, the sky would be filled with Grade 3 and Grade 4 dragons, and the mountains would be filled with terrifying draconians. Even if Gazruvi had an endless supply of metal resources and inexhaustible magical energy, he would not be able to resist the terrifying army formed by the power of the plane. Therefore, Ender's suggestion was immediately rejected. In comparison, the flesh puppet proposed by Bug Lichbliss was more reliable. The flesh puppet was a special kind of magical alloy forged from the flesh of powerful magical creatures, draconians, and the finest alloy that had been selected. This magical alloy had the physical properties of indestructibility of special metals and the elemental properties of the flesh of magical creatures. For example, the flesh left behind by the draconians and eternium, or could be used to forge a completely different kind of magical alloy, fine wind iron. It was a type of magical alloy imbued with strong wind elemental aura. When armor made of fine wind iron was attacked, it would automatically form a wind barrier, deflecting and blocking 37% of melee attacks and 65% of ranged attacks. A magic sword forged from the fine wind iron would be accompanied by a whirlwind tornado every time it was swung. Heavier enemies would be trapped in place for 3 seconds, while lighter ones would be blown away and lose control of their bodies. A magic staff forged from the fine wind iron could speed up the gathering of wind elemental energy, increasing the might of a wind elemental magus spells. The only wind elemental magus in the family, Desera, was full of praise for this, using his own experiences to proclaim the benefits of the fine wind iron. Using the fine wind iron to forge magic equipment was undoubtedly too wasteful. It was far more worthwhile to sell it in the Magus world. The AI chip estimated that the flesh of the Draconians in the first battle in Lance would bring the Crimson family about 200,000 to 300,000 magic crystals. In the past, Magi had always treated planar wars as a source of huge profits, and this was evident. However, this sort of profit wasn't something that anyone could obtain just because they wanted to. If not for the endless magic energy provided by the magic furnace and the impenetrable defense provided by the metal fortress, a single rank 2 wind dragon and 100 rank 1 draconians would be enough to flatten any small Magus family. The Crimson family that Grimm had established would not even have the strength to resist and would soon be drowned in the draconians' violent assault. Grimm's idea was to fuse battle equipment with his own elemental magic puppets to create an elemental metal magic puppet. The metal magic puppet's energy source came from the magic furnace, and it could also be supplied by elemental crystal cores. This would solve the problem of having a single source of energy. Elemental attacks were undoubtedly much faster and more powerful than those flashy goblin muskets and arcanite rifles. With the protection of a sturdy metal shell, the elemental magic puppet's weakness as a meat shield would disappear. However, the elemental magic puppet would be most compatible with the type of metal. This would require a lot of experiments to verify and filter. In the following days, Grimm also hid in the metal fortress and did not take a step out. He spent almost all of his time in the temporary witchcraft laboratory. Bliss was busy refining wind iron, and Grimm was busy combining the metal magic puppet with the elemental magic puppet. The two idling draconians, Inder and Desura, quietly snuck out of the metal fortress and ran back to the Swamp of Sorrows to hunt for rare otherworld creatures. For Magi, hunting creatures from other worlds, analyzing their physiological structure, and analyzing the source of their bloodline was also a necessary research job. Only by thoroughly studying the natives of a plane could one understand the formation mechanism of the plane and the operation of the plane's laws. The latter would often play a decisive role in planar wars. This was a scorched land filled with heat waves. The land was split into countless crisscrossing, meandering canyons and deep trenches. Looking down from the sky, one could clearly see the rolling lava flowing slowly under the ground through these cracks. Thick yellow smoke filled the air, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of sulfur. Volcanoes of various sizes were scattered all over the place, and from time to time, a thick pillar of lava would shoot out from within, adding volcanic ash and lava rocks that dragged long trails of black smoke into the air. And in the center of this scorched land that floated above the sea of lava, an exceptionally tall volcano stood tall and erect. At the top of the volcano was a ring-shaped sea of lava, and there was a huge castle carved out of obsidian floating in the air. This was a great castle floating on the sea of lava. It was originally peaceful here. Apart from the rumbling sound of the flowing lava, there was almost no other sound. Suddenly, a clear and loud, strange dragon roar came from the distant sky. Immediately, the strong body of the wind dragon Chax appeared in the sky above the lava castle. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.